Check one, check two. Peace and Black Power family. Y'all gonna like this information. Y'all gonna love this information. I got a powerful show for y'all this evening. Get your popcorn. Get something to eat. This gonna be a long show. It's gonna be a long show. So, man, listen. All I want to tell you is, make sure you got your information ready as you come in the room. Suntan, did you hit that thumbs up button yet? Did you hit that like button? I need y'all to hit the like button. Violate the like button. I'm going to hit it myself. I just hit it. And we're going to get started.
Yeah, the HOK is the toughest environment.
Y'all already know what it is.
Enter at your own risk, it's the toughest environment.
The toughest environment, right?
The HOK is the toughest environment. Yeah,
stay
strong,
risk.
don't cry. It's the toughest environment. Yeah. No handouts here. You have to earn your respect. And when you do, you make they ass regret. They call it the toughest, and the title is earned from the bridges we crossed and the lessons we learned. In a cold-blooded kingdom, a concrete cage. Muslim, Christian, Israelites step on the stage. I dare you. I dare you, I dare you, I dare you. In a cool-blooded kingdom, sa.neter created. HOK, where you can't fake it. The HOK is where you fight back. No room for error, no window attack. It's a masterclass, how you handle the heat. Where the pedigree is written on the concrete streets. Toughest environment, yeah, we know the score. Locked in on debate and asking for more. The HOK is the toughest environment. Enter at your own risk, it's the toughest environment. The HOK is the toughest environment. Stay strong, don't cry. It's the toughest environment. Yeah.
Enter at your own risk. All right, we got God Energy in the building. This is going to be a powerful show right now. Y'all already know God Energy, Canaan, the legacy hidden by history.
That's right. That's right.
Are you ready, my brother?
Oh yeah. There's definitely a legacy here. You know what I mean?
Ready? Go ahead. Talk to the people.
Yeah, there's definitely a legacy to be talked about when it comes to Canaan. You know what I mean? A lot of our introduction to Canaan and our view on Canaan is from the biblical narrative. And we know the biblical narrative doesn't really do justice to the Canaanites. But when you look at the archaeological record, the linguistic record, the genetic record, there's really a story to be told here. And the legacy hidden by history, I put it that way because the Canaanite identity has definitely been mislabeled and hidden under misnomers, right? Misnomers like Phoenician, misnomers like Punic and Carthaginian and things like that. So we're gonna go through this and really unravel the impact that these Canaanite peoples had on the world. Definitely.
Are the Canaanite people that you're talking about, are they really Israelites, the Israelite people?
Yeah. So the proper way to say that is that the Israelites are Canaanites. That's the accurate way to say that the Israelites are Canaanites.
Right.
Yeah.
For some reason, the Israelites don't believe they're the Canaanites people.
Right. And that's because the biblical narrative speaks against the Canaanites and makes it seem like Canaanites are someone different from the worshipers of Yahweh.
Will you be showing some of that in your presentation today?
Oh yeah, we're gonna cover that.
All right, let me know when you're ready. I'll put up your slide when you're ready.
Oh yeah, let's get it rocking. Let's get it rocking.
All right, go ahead. Pass you the mic, brother.
All right, so as you can see, it says Canaanites, the legacy hidden by history. But what I want to start off is how these depictions look. The two figures at the top, And oftentimes this is used by the Hebrew Israelite brothers and the brothers that believe in the Asiatic black man to show that, look, see, we are Hebrews because look how black these people look in these artifacts here. And there is truth to the blackness of these artifacts, but that doesn't make the Israelites those black people. But I am going to uncover the genetics as to why these people have these features, because a lot of people, especially in the Pan-Africanist community, assume that the Canaanites were Indo-Europeans or someone other than melanated people. But we're going to explore that a little bit. Next slide, brother. So this is a map here of the land of Canaan highlighted here, and it has some of the city-states highlighted. But this is to give people a feel for where Canaan is, where the Levant is, the River Jordan, where this story takes place, because across that landmass, you see the Tigris and Euphrates. And yes, you have migrations of people back and forth, but you also do a great disservice to the Canaanites if you were to assume that the Canaanites and the people in the Levant were simply Mesopotamians, right? That's a gross oversimplification and actually a mislabeling of the ethnic and genetic history of these peoples. So this is a separate population, even though you have cultural diffusion between the Levant and Mesopotamia. The Levantine Canaanite peoples are their own peoples. We can move on to the next slide. So some of the earliest attestations of the Canaanites, you have the Adrimi statue here. And Adrimi was the king of Alak, 1490 to 1465, or around 1450 BCE. He's known mainly from an inscription on his statue that was found at Alak by Leonard Woolley in 1939. Now, Adrimi, he succeeded by gaining his throne with the assistance of a group known as the Habiru, right? We're familiar with the Habiru from the Amarna letters. But as a result, he left his family and brothers. He took his horse, chariot, and squire, went into the desert, and joined the Habiru people in Amaya, in the land of Canaan. So this is where you get the mention of the land of Canaan. And he was successful. The Habiru were allies of his. And next slide, Sa. And we also see attestation to the Canaanites mentioned in the letters to the king of Mari, right? Foreign correspondences, primarily from the kings of Levant to the pharaohs of Egypt, who we know were in control of Canaan, similar to the Amarna letters. Next slide. So here we have an article, Canaan, Phoenicia, and Sidon, by J.B. Tsirkin of Novgorod University. And the highlighted portion here says, it seems to be more natural to trace the denomination Canaan, both of ethnos and land, to their ancestors' name. Philon of Byblos speaks about Canaan, who afterwards received the name Phoenikos, right? So we have this Canaan who then gets later called Phoenikos. The Greeks considered Phoenikon to be the Phoenicians' ancestor, making it an eponym. The name Canaan itself is a variant of the name that is reproduced as Canaan in cuneiform literature. So what this is talking about is it's giving an etymology of the word Canaan. And what it's implying is that pronouncing it Canaan comes from the translations from cuneiform from Mesopotamia. It's implying here that the Semitic way of the Levant was to pronounce it Canaan. And it says this Canaan was a fictive ancestor of the people in that. And this ancestor comes from a very specific mythology. Next slide. So this is the work by that Philon of Byblos that was mentioned, right? This is sa.neter's Phoenician history, translated from the first book of Eusebius, and it has a continuation by Aristophanes, right? So this is a copy of a Phoenician mythology that was found by Philon of Byblos. Then Philon of Byblos makes his copy. Eusebius has a translation and a commentary on that work. And then Eratosthenes also compares it with his canon that he makes for the early church, right? So the book sa.neter's Phoenician History is a combination of 4 authors. sa.neter, the original Phoenician priest that wrote down the mythology, Philo of Byblos, who found that copy and preserved it, then Eusebius and Eratosthenes' Christian commentary on it. But in this mythology, it puts Canaan as Asar's brother. Now, we've never seen this before, where Asar is said to have a Semitic brother named Canaan. We know Seth is supposedly Asar's brother, but where is this Canaan, right? So it says that Canaan is Canaan and his brother Osiris, or Mizraim. So this is also connecting Mizraim to Osiris, right? Called his cities by Hellanicus. Plutarch's mystical fable, De Isidid, right? So it says, though containing many things relating to later times than Mizraim's life, yet has also many other things agreeable to sa.neter's history of elder times. Next slide. And this is the actual quote from the mythology. And it says, one of these was Isidis, the inventor of the 3 letters, the brother of that Canaan who was first called Phoenician, right? So this is a quote from the telling of it. And it says, it continues on, here we have mention of Canaan, concerning whom it is generally agreed amongst the learned that he is Canaan, the son of Ham, and the brother of Mizraim. Right? So it says that they already know that Canaan is meant to be what is pronounced Canaan in our vernacular and times. So it says, from time comprehended under the later name of Phoenicia as a part of it, is anciently was called the land of Canaan. And in this sa.neter's Phoenician history, this is a mythology that combines gods like Kronos, Zeus, with Egyptian gods like Tahuti, and as we see, Osar, but also Semitic gods like Canaan, Eshmun, and Siddiq. So as we know, Phoenicia was metropolitan. So you had the presence of Greek peoples there, Semitic peoples there, and Egyptian peoples there, who often ruled that land. So this is a mythology that reflects that combination. It is a syncretism of Greek, Egyptian, and Semitic mythologies. That is exactly what we later see reproduced as the Bible, right? So there's a lineage being kept here. Next slide. And it says, we pronounce the first syllable in Canaan, ka, right? With the first syllable of the word Canaan, that K. But it says, yet the Jews did not so, but the Shiva joins the letter C and N into one syllable, making it Canaan, right? So it's giving the etymology as to why we pronounce it Canaan now, yet you see it as Canaan in this Phoenician mythology. Next slide. And that Canaan is going to be very relevant later. So, as most of us know, the Canaanites were a Semitic-speaking peoples, right? Examples of Western Semitic is modern South Arabian, Old South Arabian, Arabic, Ethiopic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Amorite, and Ugaritic. Akkadian would be considered Eastern Semitic, for example. Next slide. No, there's one up before that, the map. That's the next slide, yeah. So as you see, the Afro-Asiatic language family and its distribution, most of the variety of the Afro-Asiatic language family is in Africa. And only one portion, the Semitic portion, is located in Asia, right? In what they call the Near East. So the term Afro-Asiatic, because Hebrew and Arabic is so prominent from the Abrahamic religions in the Western world, Afro-Asiatic, we usually always associate with Semitic, forgetting how African these languages are and what Afro-Asiatic actually implies, because it's meant to imply Africa in origin, then popular amongst Asiatics. That's the implied statement behind Afro-Asiatic. And I'm going to demonstrate why I make that statement. Next slide, brother. So if you look at the Afro-Asiatic language family, some examples, right? You have the Libyo-Chadic, Egypto-Semitic, Cushitic, and Omotic in that label. And all of that implies the African continent within African borders. The next level down, you have Berber, that's Africa. Chadic, that's Africa. Egyptian, that's Africa. Semitic, we'll see what that equals. North Cushitic, Africa. Narrow Cushitic, Africa. The next level down, Tamajek, Africa. Hausa, Africa. Coptic, Africa. Hebrew, we know where that's going. Beja, Africa. Somali, Africa. Ometa, Africa. So when we look at the brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles of the Semitic and Hebrew language, it's all African. Yet it seems like Pan-Africanists and Hebrew Israelites, some of them, go out of their way to separate the Semitic and Hebrew from Africa. But all of the relatives makes that seem like a little far-fetched. And we're going to get into some more details here. Next slide. So this is Semitic Languages Outline of a Comparative Grammar by Edward Lipinski. And it says, Proto-Semitic maintained for a certain time closer language contacts with Libyco-Berber and with Cushitic. That's Africa, specifically North and Northeast Africa. That's important. This implies that the speakers of Proto-Semitic were still dwelling in Africa in the 5th millennium BC. That's important, right? The speakers of the Semitic language were still in Africa at the time of 5,000 and 3,500 BCE, right? So this lineage of Adam and Cain and Abel and all of these people spanning back into time immemorial, speaking Hebrew and then speaking this Hebrew outside of Africa, the Semitic language was still dwelling within Africa at 5,000 and 3,500 BCE during the time when the Sahara's climate was much wetter. So there is no deep-rooted history and time of the Semitic language outside of Africa in the Levant, right? It says here that the Semitic language's origin was in Africa. And this gets into how worsening environmental conditions moved peoples from out of Africa, North Africa, into the Levant, right? Like the disappearance of vegetation, fauna disappearing, desertification, and desertion. Next slide, Sa.
Yeah, shout out to my man Unc in the chat. And I want y'all to see with God Energy, he understands the assignment. He's bringing you sources, man. He's coming in with sources where y'all can see it. And he's telling you the page number where you can go and check it out. So he understands the assignment and how this thing works and how it go.
Yes, sir. Much appreciated, Sa. Much appreciated, brother. So it says, thus from North Africa, wave after wave of Semitic migrations would seem to have set forth. The earliest of these migrants and those who went farthest to the east were the Akkadians. I mentioned them before. They spoke a Eastern Semitic, right? Who journeying along the Fertile Crescent through Palestine and Syria and crossing over into Mesopotamia, reached northern Babylonia circa 3000 BCE and founded the first Semitic empire at Kish, right? So around this time is when the Semitic language starts to spread outside of Africa. So what this is implying is that up until this time, even the Semitic language was confined completely to Africa. So the Semitic language, Proto-Semitic, the earliest versions of Semitic, is African in origin, was born inside of Africa. The Southern Semites would seem to have reached the moister highlands of the Yemen and Hadramaut after 2000 BCE, following the collapse of the early Bronze culture in Palestine, while the Ethiopians would have crossed over to the Horn of Africa when drier conditions prevailed in South Arabia. around 1500 to 500 BCE. It says, Libico Berber continued instead to occupy the original language area of the speakers of Afro-Asiatic. So before Semitic, you have the larger Afro-Asiatic language and dialect that was spoken, right? The peoples of the Libico Berber area, they inhabit the homeland, the birthplace of the Afro-Asiatic language family. The origins, before that language family broke up into different dialects that became the different languages known as Chadic, Berber, Tuareg, Hausa, Coptic. Before those things diversified, they were all once the Afro-Asiatic language. And the people of the Libico Berber area inhabit the homeland of Afro-Asiatic. So the peoples there are the originators of that language. It says their African origins may even be confirmed by a relationship of Afro-Asiatic with Bantu. So now we're also connecting Afro-Asiatic with Bantu languages which form the central group of the large Niger-Congo family. So now we're also making genetic linguistic connections between Afro-Asiatic, Bantu, and Niger-Congo speaking peoples. This is very important. And it's not just linguistic connections that these people have. The connections get defined genetically as well. Next slide. So it says the Afro-Asians belong basically to the long-headed or dolichocephalic. Dolichocephalic describes the shape of the skull, where the skull is longer from forehead to the back than it is from ear to ear. That's why they're describing it as long-headed. But it says the long-headed dolichocephalic Mediterranean peoples, widespread in distribution in late Neolithic and Chalcolithic times. So just like the Canaanites have been hidden through different misnomers, Africoid or Black peoples have been hidden in history as well through terms like Mediterranean peoples, the Mediterranean race. You'll go back, you'll look and you'll find that used as a descriptive in some of the earlier books and research on history. What they are implying is Black people when they say the Mediterranean race. So it says, however, skeletal evidence seems to indicate the same Neolithic peoples from North Africa entered the Iberian Peninsula, like such peoples like the Ibero-Mauritians, whose name implies Iberia and Mauritania, those two places being the territories that the Ibero-Mauritians were centered in. So it says these peoples moved into the Iberian Peninsula and moved into the Egyptian upper valley of the Nile in pre-dynastic times. Next slide, sir. So here's a visual, right, of the Proto-Afro-Asiatic, right? And in this homeland, these are the peoples that are connected to the Bantu, right? Just like was stated a few slides earlier. These Proto-Afro-Asiatic speakers had contact with the Bantu speakers who formed a part of the Niger-Congo language family, right over there, but also Nilo-Saharans as well. And those blue arrows point to the later languages, right, that would form out of this Proto-Afro-Asiatic large language family. Next slide. So some of these Proto-Afro-Asiatic groups, we're going to put a name on them, right? The Kithians were skilled hunters. Bones of many large savanna animals were discovered in the same area, suggesting that they lived along the shores of a lake that was present during the Holocene wet phase, a period when the Saharan desert was verdant and wet, right? The Kithian peoples, they were tall, standing over 6 feet in height. Craniometric analysis by Sereno and others suggests that this early Holocene population was related to the late Pleistocene Ibero-Mauritians. Those are some of my favorite peoples to talk about when we're talking about the Semitic language and North Africa in general, right? And it says the Kithians here in the early Holocene, so that's around 12 and 10,000 BCE. It says they are related to the late Pleistocene Ibero-Mauritians. That's around 25,000 BCE. So the Ibero-Mauritians come first. They come before the Kithians. We're going to talk more about them later. And it says, and early Holocene Capsians of the Maghreb, as well as mid-Holocenes Makenta groups. based on dental evidence from Joel D. Iris. Joel D. Iris, the article that they're talking about here is dental non-metric affinities tracing the Bantu expansion to its root, right? So Joel D. Iris from the Liverpool John Moores University suggests sub-Saharan West African affinities for the Kiphians. So these North Africans, these Proto-Afro-Asiatic peoples, it says, has sub-Saharan West African affinities, in turn suggesting that the common ancestors of West African and Proto-Bantu peoples may have originated in the southwestern region of the Sahara amid the Kiphian period at Gebero, and may have migrated southward from the Sahara into various parts of West Africa, like Benin, Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Togo. And it says, as a result of desertification of the Green Sahara in around 7000 BC from parts of the southeast Nigeria and Cameroon, Proto-Bantu peoples began to migrate. And amid migration diverged into Eastern Bantu peoples and Western Bantu peoples. What was just said here is that sub-Saharan Africans and Bantu peoples actually have their origin in the Sahara. Now, North Africa and the Sahara are usually a place where they use to de-Africanize people, de-Africanize the population. That's why the term sub-Saharan exists, because sub-Saharan is supposed to equal Africoid. Sub-Saharan is supposed to equal Black. But what the evidence shows is that sub-Saharans are Saharans, right? And that these people migrated from the Sahara downwards into these other areas, which is why you would have a genetic linguistic relationship between Afro-Asiatic and the Bantu languages, because the Bantu peoples are from the Afro-Asiatic homeland, which is North Africa. And Africanizing North Africa, right, bringing the Blackness back to North Africa is extremely important in this conversation and the conversation about the Blackness of Kemet. Next slide. So let's get to some of the genetic evidence here, right? And this chart right here is to represent that haplogroup diversification and which ones came about inside Africa and outside of Africa. Right, and this chart is from the genetic study done by Underhill and Cavisild in 2007 in the Annual Review of Genetics. But I want you to pay attention here because the DE haplogroup, right, clearly in that tan area is within Africa. Then you go down and the DE haplogroup splits into D and E. The E is still within Africa as well, according to this genetic study. And the significance of this is because we know that the Hebrews and Semitic peoples and Afro-Asiatic peoples talk about their E haplogroup as a representation of some sort of Semitic lineage, an outside of Africa lineage, an Asiatic lineage, a Levantine lineage, as if being a part of the E haplogroup exclusively makes you Semitic, Levantine, and Asiatic. That does not seem to be the case. According to this genetic study, the DE haplogroup diverged in Africa and the E haplogroup emerged in Africa as well, making it African. Next slide. So we have another genetic study here called Rare Deep Rooting DO African Y chromosomal haplogroup and its implications for the expansion of modern humans out of Africa by Haber and others. It says, considering both Y chromosomal phylogenetic structure, incorporating the DO lineage and published evidence for modern humans outside Africa, the most favored model involves an origin of the DE lineage within Africa. The DE lineage emerges within Africa, with DO and E remaining there. Full stop. Full stop. The DE haplogroup emerges in Africa. The E haplogroup emerges in Africa, according to both of these genetic studies, right? So it says, and migrations out of the three lineage C, D, and FT that now form the vast majority of non-African Y chromosomes. So this is important, So the genetic evidence also shows that speakers of Afro-Asiatic or the haplogroup associated with Semitic speakers, that haplogroup emerged in Africa. We looked at the linguistic evidence tracing the origins of the Semitic language and Proto-Semitic language, and it clearly said that origin was also in Africa. So the linguistic evidence and the genetic evidence both point to Africa. Next slide. Let's go to another genetic study. It's called Genetics, Egypt, and History, Interpreting Geographical Patterns of Y Chromosomal Variation by S.O.Y. Kita of the National Human Genome Center, Howard University Department of Anthropology, Smithsonian Institute, and A.J. Boyce of the Institute of Biological Anthropology and St. John's College, Oxford University. Next slide. So it says the genetic data, specifically the M35 subclade, that's EM35 subclade, affiliated with the haplotype 5 in Africa, can be related to the spatial range of much of the Afro-Asiatic language phylum. So it's even down to the subclade of the E haplogroup that can be associated with the Afro-Asiatic language phylum. So the correlation between the linguistics and the genetics is so one-to-one, right? When you layer these sciences on top of each other. So comparative analysis is important when we're trying to dive deep into the past. You can't just look at the text. You can't just look at the archaeology. The genetics also is extremely important. So it says, which evidence suggests most likely originated in Africa. The Afro-Asiatic language phylum originated in Africa. Only one member, Semitic, is found in the Near East. And it gives citation underneath. Next slide. So it says the Mushabi culture in the Levant might have been created by a Mesolithic, that's Epipaleolithic, right? So that's around 30,000 BCE, population from the Nile Valley and the Ibero-Maurusians in the Maghreb, right? So the Mushabi culture of the Levant, this genetics study here is saying that Mushabi culture of the Levant, those people migrated out of the Nile Valley and were Ibero-Maurusians of North Africa. Next slide. It continues on to say the widespread distribution of the PN2 clade in the major language phyla of Africa, its existence in the Levantine Iraq region and even in the Aegean, and it's likely post-glacial maximum date, that's after the glacial period. This is around the Neolithic times, right? 10,000 BCE. They are significant and show numerous bioculturally diverse peoples can be connected. What they're talking about is all the way from the Levant and Iraq to the Aegean, which is the Mediterranean and beginning to be the Greek world. And of course, Africa, these people are connected, even at relatively shallow time depths. This should give pause to those who trouble escaping racial thinking. So what this is implying, that why they put this part in here to challenge people's racial thinking, is because it's trying to say these Black people from out of Africa carrying the E haplogroup, carrying the haplotype 5 of Africa, migrated to the Levant, migrated to Iraq, migrated to the Aegean. So they're trying to tell these people in these areas, you may have Black ancestors, so you should escape your racial thinking. Next slide. So, firmly just established the African origins of the E haplogroup, the African origins of the Semitic language, we just confirmed. But this is also a map here of the spread of the E haplogroup. And the colored in portions you can see extend into the Aegean, just like the genetic article just said. And it expands well into Europe, right? Well into Europe. Up there near France and Germany and things like that. So this helps explain the spread and migration of Black peoples out of Africa. And the story can be done and charted through these haplogroups. Next slide. So this is Black Athena by Martin Bernal, and he says, I further accept the conventional, though disputed view that a language family originates from a single dialect. I therefore believe that there must once have been a peoples who spoke Proto-Afro-Asiatic Indo-European, right? Such a language, family, and culture must have broken up a very long time ago. The latest possibility would be the Mousterian period, 50,000 to 30,000 years ago. What he just said, right? Because Afro-Asiatic is, I just gave a little breakdown of Afro-Asiatic, where it comes from, who it's associated with. But right here, he connects it to Indo-European, right? That's very interesting because the Indo-European speakers and peoples first arrive at a very specific point in time. And then also they're migrating from the complete opposite direction, bringing a complete opposite culture. They are a complete opposite genetic group of peoples. But the slide that we just shown of the E haplogroup, who are Semitic speakers, Afro-Asiatic speakers, they were in these Aegean and European areas, definitely making contact with Indo-European speaking peoples. And the study has been done on the insular Celtic languages. The oldest Celtic languages preserve a genetic affinity with Afro-Asiatic languages. So the oldest Celtic languages, the least influenced by outsiders Celtic languages, are similar to Afro-Asiatic languages, where they differ from other Celtic languages. So that does imply some connection, cultural diffusion, or even common ancestry between Afro-Asiatic peoples and the earliest speakers of the insular Celtic languages. This is important. Next slide, Sa. So from that same article, the diversification and early expansion of the PN2 bearing populations likely started in the northeastern quadrant of Africa. Remember, these people are associated with the Afro-Asiatic language phyla. This region is postulated to be the ancestral home of 2 of the 3 major language phyla in supra-equatorial Africa: Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic, citation by Blench and Eric. And Eric actually does a lot of work with Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic. Eric actually says that it's Nilo-Saharan speakers and the Nilo-Saharan region of the Nile Valley that the earliest parts of the Kemetic culture stem from. Next slide. And if you take a look here, if you could see, the chart here that says A, the haplogroup distribution labeled A and the haplogroup distribution labeled E in that chart, the EV22 and EM78 subclades correlate exactly with the range where they say the Afro-Asiatic homeland is, right? And that EM78 is relevant because in the genetic article, Pleistocene North African genomes link Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan African populations, in that genetic article, they tested Ibero-Maurutian findings at Taffrot, and all of the males whom they could get genetic evidence from carried EM78, right? So, and these Ibero-Maurutians span back, remember, 25,000 BCE. These are the Proto-Afro-Asiatic speakers, and it is from these Afro-Asiatic speakers of Ibero-Maurutians, their descendants then create these other Semitic languages like Proto-Semitic and so on and so forth. So that EM78 subclade, its temporal range, its distribution, its correlation to the Afro-Asiatic language phylum is essential to this story. EM78 and the Ibero-Maurutians are the ancestors of these later Levantine peoples and Semitic speakers. Next slide. And we're gonna do some work identifying these Levantine Africans. So it says society that we see in process of developing an economy based first on the system of gathering of wild cereals, and then afterwards, production was to be found in Palestine, Transjordan, and Lebanon between about 10,000 and 8,000 BCE, dubbed by prehistorians the Natufians, right? The Natufians, they had a slight build and a long head, aka dolichocephalic. Thank you, Sa. Thank you, Sa. That's much better. So dolichocephalic, remember, this means they were those long-headed peoples. Actually, an example of this would be some of the Egyptian statues. We've seen Egyptian busts before, right? The statues of the heads, where the Egyptian head is very elongated. That is to represent dolichocephaly, right? But it's a very African cranial feature. So Natufians, like the modern Bantu, right, practice evulsion of the incisors. Oh, I'm sorry. And I'm reading from Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times by Donald Redford. So again, even Donald Redford is connecting the Natufians and Bantu. He's speaking Natufian and Bantu in the same breath, right? The same way that we discussed that the Bantu, Sub-Saharan Africans, and Niger-Congo speakers have origins in the lands of the Ibero-Maurusians. So with those Ibero-Maurusians that I just mentioned, they are a common ancestor of Bantu peoples and Natufian peoples. They are the ancestor of Niger-Congo peoples and the earliest Semitic speakers and inhabitants of the Levant. It's all Hamitic. Remember Ashe said this, he had a section said it's all Hamitic. Boy, is it. So it says, Natufians did possess more or less permanent settlements which entered upon caves and were located on hilltops and springs. And it continues on furthermore about their culture. Next slide. And the top there, it talks about the Younger Dryas event, right? The desertification, the wet Sahara, and what moved these peoples. But I want to focus you on that bottom part where it says, and remember all the African origin of these Natufians. Göbekli Tepe, a Neolithic archaeological site in Upper Mesopotamia, was inhabited from around 9,500 BCE to at least 8,000 BCE. The round oval architecture that characterized the Natufians and Göbekli Tepe was replaced by rectilinear designs. Right? That settlement, Navali Kori, built around 8,400 years ago, showed some agricultural ties to Göbekli Tepe, or architectural or agricultural. Sorry, the super chat is covering that up. Ties Göbekli Tepe, and yet employed the new rectilinear or cultural ties, right? Rectilinear building architecture. So we just brought African Göbekli Tepe. Right? These things are important because they will tell you that Göbekli Tepe was built by a hunter-gatherer population. Very ambiguous, right? Oh, the hunter-gatherers of well, who were these hunter-gatherers? What did they look like ethnically? What was their genetic makeup? What was their ancestry? It seems like it's all Hamitic. But naturally, of course, yes, there was Indo-European introgression and admixture with the Natufians. So for me to sit here and make it seem like the Natufians were all African, that would be dishonest and disingenuous to this whole presentation. So yes, later at times the Natufians do become mixed, right? They are a population that is the result of admixture between these North Africans and Indo-European peoples. Next slide. So, and part of this Africanness can be traced in their culture. So it says a sort of ancestor worship seems to be attested for, right? This in the 7th millennium BCE manifest in the curious cult of skulls. Next slide. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the next slide. But let me let y'all know the bomb squad, man, we ain't playing, man. We not playing.
Oh, yeah,
God energy is not playing. And as you can see, he's giving you the sources. He's not making none of this up. So he's giving you the sources. He understands the assignment. Like my brother Ashe, they bring you sources. These young brothers are getting it in. They getting it in.
I appreciate it.
We ain't nothing to play with right here today, man. All right, next slide. Where we at? Right here.
Mm-hmm. So this is an example of the skull cult, right? So they adorn the skulls with shells and things like that, and it is said for that to pay honor and veneration to their ancestors. And we know ancestor worship is a characteristic of African culture. But this recreation, right? They always try to de-Africanize when they do these recreations, because I want you to look at his skull shape when he's doing his side profile view. the skull index dolichocephalic implies that his skull should be a little longer than that. Right? So, and where it said they were prognathous, meaning his jawline should stick out a little more and his bottom lip should stick out further than his top lip. If that was accurately represented, he would look even more Africoid than he does in the front view, right? So also I want to highlight how the people doing the skeletal analysis, the osteological analysis, the craniometrics, they will publish information that points to more Africoid. But then when it's time to create these facsimiles, they often de-Africanize these depictions. So I just wanted to put that out there. And it is these Natufians in the article, Whole Genome Ancestry of an Old Kingdom Egyptian. It is the Natufians that they try to use to de-Africanize the Egyptians, right? And when they say North African. So in that article, they use those terms for what the public implies with those statements. So when people hear North African, you already think of the modern North African who doesn't look black or Negroid or Africoid, right? Natufian, they say Natufian and say Levant and Eurasian to make you think not African. But everything we just learned about the Natufians shows their African ancestry, shows they had African phenotypes. And then also the information that I put out shows that North Africans in general were sub-Saharan African in their looks, and that the sub-Saharan African is actually the Saharan African. So in that genetic study called Whole Genome Ancestry of an Old Kingdom Egyptian, they try to give a false impression with the labeling and use Natufians and African peoples and North Africans, African peoples, to de-Africanize the Egyptians. This information is important. Next slide, Sa. It's just another example of the skull cult. Next slide. So we're getting into the aspects of Canaan now, right? And we know that the Natufians and these Ibero-Maroojans were the ancestors of these Canaanite peoples, right? So a little bit about Canaan. Oh, and that picture there, it is Tel El Dan is the location. Right, that's from the 18th century, located at Laish or Lashem, right? It's near Mount Hermon on the Jordan River, right? And the Canaanite culture, these Canaanites were organized in city-states. Each city had a patron deity, right? They lived along the coastal plains originally, right? The coastal areas, they were seafarers. That's why Phoenicia was so rich. It was at the crossroads of several trade routes. We're going to get into that. And the Canaanites were not politically unified under a central monarchy. They were organized in city-states. So when we hear of Canaanites, we hear of them described in this city-state political structure, right? And when the Canaanites were able to form central monarchies, those Canaanite central monarchy kingdoms you know of as Israel, Judah, Ammon, Moab, and Edom, right? That's why each of those cities had a patron deity, just like each Canaanite city-state had a patron deity. But that was common throughout the ancient world as well, right? So I can't even say that that's a Canaanite feature, having a patron deity. But it's still a major correlation. Next slide. So Canaan and its culture, the territory of the Canaanites spanned from modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, northern Syria, western Jordan. Some known Canaanite cities are Lachish, Gaza, Ain, Gaza, very popular in the zeitgeist right now. Ain, Ashkelon, Gezer, we're going to talk about Gezer, Joppa, Shechem, Megiddo, where you get the term Armageddon from, Dor, Hatzor, Akko, Laish, like I just mentioned, Tyre, Sidon, Damascus, Apheka, and Byblos. So what gets lumped together under the broad term Canaanite is really a large group of different tribal groups and city-states and kingdoms that occupied a particular region. While they had many similarities, they also had distinct social and cultural differences. And what I want to get into is identify and put a name on some of these kingdoms throughout history who were Canaanites. Next slide. So again, So we have the fact that these communities are not cities at all, but rather walled towns, right, into which a rural population might retreat when danger threatens, right? So the population was relatively evenly distributed through the lowlands and the uplands, with the greatest density in the upper Jordan Valley of the Valley of Jezreel, right? Jezreel, that's important. We're gonna talk back about that. And the northern coastal plains, again, where Phoenicia is. So the highest density, in that time, when you thought of Canaan and the population and where things were centered, you would think of the upper Jordan. You would think of the Valley of Jezreel, where things are going on. Next slide. So back to some of those trade routes, right? So the Egyptian trade route known as the Via Maris, or Way of Heru, linked Egypt with the northern empires of Syria, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia. So another important trade route was the King's Highway, which connected Africa with Mesopotamia. So you had the Via Maris running through the Levant, and you had the King's Highway running through the Levant. So this made the Levant in that area very important for the trade between the different land masses, right, that were interconnected through that trade. Who knows if that may be a similar reason to why that is such a controversial and sought over and disputed area in present times. Next slide. So the Via Maris, right, it was crossed by trading routes, so one could travel from Africa to Europe to Asia to Africa. And this was the Via Maris, right? So we often talk about the Silk Road and try to romanticize, and we get a lot of history about the Silk Road and how it connected all these different places. But the foundations of that Silk Road quite literally was built off of the Via Maris, right? So it crossed Alcantara, right? Pelusium, the Sinai, El Arish, Rafan, Canaan, Gaza, Ascalon, Ashdod, Afak, Yarkon, the Yarkon River, Dor, Megiddo, the Jezreel Valley, right? Tiberias, Megiddo, the Sea of Galilee, Migdal, Capernaum, Hatzor, the River Jordan, Jacob's Ford, Damascus, the Euphrates, and then proceeded northward into Anatolia, right? So it touched all over these places, all of the major Canaanite sites. It went to the Euphrates. It came from Africa. It went to Anatolia. Next slide. So some light has been shed on this time period through the Amarna letters. I know a lot of us are familiar with the Amarna letters, and they're a body of 14th century correspondence exchanged between the rulers of the Near East and Egypt, right? Because Egypt were the imperial suzerains of, the Levantine peoples. They are perhaps the earliest example of international diplomacy. While their most common subjects are negotiations of diplomatic marriage, friendship, statements, and exchanged materials. The name Amarna letters derives from the place where the tables were found, the ancient city of Akhetaten, built by the pharaoh Akhenaten, but nowadays we know it as Tel El Amarna. Next slide. But the Akkadian of the letters is heavily colored by the mother tongue of their writers. So it was written in the Akkadian script, right? But the language that was being written, it says the people probably spoke an early form of Proto-Canaanite, the language which would later evolve into the daughter languages of Hebrew and Phoenician. So it says these Canaanisms provide valuable insight into the proto-stage of those languages several centuries prior to their first actual manifestation, right? So this is important as an inscription to the study of the Canaanite language and epigraphy. So during the reign of Thutmose III, the Egyptian army went as far as the Euphrates. So this is all the way over into Mesopotamia. The Egyptian army is establishing their dominance and their presence as an imperial power. So it says establishing an empire in Canaan. These territories became vassals of Egypt, and some examples are Amuru, Byblos, Damascus, and Kadesh. We're going to talk more about Amuru. Next slide. So at that time, right, the Egyptian Empire around 1450 BCE, and this is actually around the time of the Idrimi inscription from slide number 2 or 3, right? Idrimi was exactly at the time of 1450, but the entire family attributed to the biblical Ham was under one empire during this time period: Cush, Egypt, Punt, and Canaan, right? So it seems like Ham is a metaphor for whatever was going on politically. Next slide. Thank you, brother. So it says, right, Diodorus Siculus, quoted by Eusebius, where he assures us that Osiris, having married Isis, in many ways promoted the god of that kingdom, but especially by building the chief city thereof, called by the Greeks Diospolis. But the Jews called it Haman, and therein erecting the temple of his parents, whom the Greeks called Zeus and Hera. But the Egyptians are known to call his father Amun, as the Jews Haman or Ham. So in sa.neter's Phoenician history, we also get a Semitic etymology for the word Ham, coming from Haman, coming from Amun. Right? So the etymological root, according to this source, the etymological root of Ham is from Ammon. So when you are saying the children of Ham, you are saying the children of Ammon. Now, if you look at that empire established by the Egyptians, that seems accurate that you would call that the children of Ammon, right? Because in African spirituality, being the child of the deity was part of your initiation. So these are the children of Ammon. And like I stated before, having a patron deity, cities had patron deities. This empire had that patron deity of Ammon. That's being suggested by this text here. So being the children of Ham is a metaphor for being children of Ammon, who was the god of that Egyptian empire that encompassed the land of Canaan, Punt, Cush, and Kemet. Next slide. So we gotta go back one. Right, so this is from the article Canaan, Phoenicia, and Sidon. So it says, to sum up, it may be assumed that the Phoenicians regarded themselves as Canaanites, right? The Egyptians called some of them Fenku, whence the Greeks adopted the denomination Phoenician, right? And much later even coined their own eponym Phoenix. So right here, this is saying that actually the Egyptians termed these people Fenku, and then the Greeks, right, Hellenized that term, and then they came with Phoenix. So we usually hear that Phoenikos or Phoenix, it was the Greek term for these peoples in the upper coastal regions of Canaan. What this source is saying is that, okay, but those Greeks got that term from the Egyptian term Fenku. Right? So it says originally the Greeks applied this name only to the northern part of Phoenicia. Its southern part, we believe, was called Sidon, the way it was called by the Greeks and the Phoenicians' Asiatic neighbors. Next slide. So it says masonry techniques derived from Egypt appear in the temple architecture of the 3rd millennium BCE, and motifs such as the frieze of the rearing urea was adopted to local requirements. And it's referring to artifact known as plate 7. Next slide. Right. So, and here is an example. On the right-hand side, you have the rearing urea at the top. Right? Those are all of the urea. And then you see the Egyptian winged sun disk. And then you see the two figures of the side wearing the upper and lower crowns of Kemet. Both of them are wearing that. Right? And they're intertwined around this lotus. And this depiction actually is associated with the term Smai Tawi, or the uniting of the two lands. Shout out to my brother Yogi on that one. And masonry techniques. Speaking of the Phoenicians and masonry, right? A central figure in the Masonic tradition is Hiram Abiff. the Phoenician, right, who was the master builder of Solomon's temple, right? So we just went through all this effort pointing out how the Phoenicians were Canaanites, right? So in Masonry, the central figure of this tradition is a Canaanite figure. Let alone what this may imply about the Israelite figure or Hebrew figure at the center of that tradition, but we'll get to that later. Next slide. Eshmun, right? So this is from the book Carthage Must Be Destroyed by Richard Miles. And it says, for 6 long days and nights, the streets of Carthage were consumed by the hellish turmoil, with Scipio conserving the physical strength and sanity of his men by regularly rotating his killing squad. So this is talking about the conflict between the Romans and the Carthaginians. So it says, then on the 7th day, a delegation of Carthaginian elders bearing olive branches from the sacred temple of Eshmun as a sign of peace came to beg the Roman general for their lives and those of their fellow citizens be spared. Next slide. That Eshmun figure, this is a Phoenician deity, right? Centered in Sidon. And his temple in Sidon was founded by Eshmunazar, right? Who has a theophoric name referencing Eshmun, Eshmunazar II, the king of Sidon, right? And this temple served as a sanctuary for Eshmun, the Phoenician god of healing. Its construction was a political move aiming to solidify Sidon's power in the region. It says people from far and wide, I skip to the next paragraph, people from far and wide visited seeking Eshmun's divine intervention for their ailments. Interesting about Eshmun, he is a healing god, known as a healer, similar to Jesus. But Eshmun was also known as the oiled one, right? So this is significant in what you would call that oiling or oiled process. What would you call the oiled one in Greek? Krio. What is the term, the Semitic term for smearing and anointed with scented oils and unguents? Meseh. So Eshmun, this Phoenician Sidonian deity, was a healing Meseh. He was a healing Krio. Right? Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So we can see where the origins of some of these later biblical concepts, Old Testament and New Testament, stem from in this Canaanite lineage, in this Canaanite culture. Next slide. And it says here, increasingly, scholars have also speculated on the Phoenicians' involvement in joint commercial ventures with the Greeks, besides the Euboeans, who were one of their earliest trade partners. One particularly intriguing case is the city of Corinth, the pottery of which shows a clear orientalizing influence and begins to be explored and exported in large quantities to both Phoenician and Greek settlements in the central and western Mediterranean during this period. Next. Luxury goods and artisan techniques were not the only thing that the Phoenicians had brought with them to Greece. Although the Phoenicians went to trade and not to deliver an extended tutorial on culture, many aspects of Greek literature, language, religious ritual, and art were clearly heavily influenced by the Near East. Perhaps most important was the alphabet. Next slide. So the Greeks have their alphabet thanks to their interactions with these Canaanites. So on the left, right, that's an example of a citadel found at Tiryns, right? So this is a Greek citadel. This is an Aegean citadel, Mediterranean citadel. And the highlighted portions show the portions where certain pottery shards were found. And on the right is a recreation of the vessel that would have been made from those shards. So why this is significant, next slide. On these shards, right, on this vase, was preserved certain inscriptions from the alphabet, and specifically the Cypro-Minoan script. And what they're talking about here is the etching in the middle, where it doesn't reach all the way to the point of the wishbone shape or the A shape at the top in certain inscriptions. And when it reaches the top, that's the development. So it goes from the stroke going from the top of the connection all the way down. And as it travels and gets transported from the original Canaanite source through the Cypro-Minoan peoples and them etching it to the Greeks, that etch shortens and it doesn't reach all the way to the top. So this is just showing the development of the Semitic script as it gets transmitted through the Mediterranean, right? So it goes from Canaanite to Cypro-Minoan to what we later call Greek. Next slide. Yes, and that does relate to linear A and linear B of the Greek alphabet, just to put that out there. So Phoenicia and Sardinia. So this is a map of the trade network that I was explaining and the heavy influence that they have in the Aegean, in Sicily. And I highlighted Sardinia there because aside from the Euboeans, the Sardinians were one of the major trade partners of the Phoenicians as well. And what they found is that it is the Sardinians and the Nuragic culture of Sardinia where a large portion of the sea peoples came from, right? So, and it's tracing the Nuragic culture, the affinities of the Nuragic culture, and what later gets brought to the Near East with these invading sea peoples. And they translated the inscription of the Peleshet. The Egyptians named a few groups of the sea peoples, and it is the highlight of these Peleshet sea peoples that also gives you what you call Philistine. So these Peleshet sea peoples from the Aegean settle in the Levant, and that term Peleshet becomes what we know of as Philistine, which then becomes Palestine. But the Bronze Age collapse and its association with the sea peoples was done at the hands of these people of Sardinia and the surrounding Aegean islands. That's why they're called the sea peoples, because they were from those Aegean islands there. Interestingly enough, the only group of peoples that were not devastated by the sea peoples invasion were the Phoenicians, their close trade partners. So even the invasion of the sea peoples politically was advantageous to the Phoenicians. Next slide. And the Carthaginian Empire arises right on top of that trade network that the Phoenicians established, right? So this shows the Roman territory at the time and the Carthaginian territory at the time. And with their close proximity and competition in that area, you can see why these peoples eventually went to war. But also, I want you to see that map right there in that territory to associate with a Canaanite empire. So they'll show you a map of the Roman Empire. I showed you a map of the Egyptian Empire of Thutmosis in 1450 BCE. And now this is good to see Canaanite territory, right? The land that was under their control. Next slide. So again, the Carthage, right? Its Phoenician name or new city certainly suggests that Carthage was set up as a colonial settlement and not just a trading post. So it goes on to say it is clear that Carthage had, during the 8th century BC, become a key coordinate on the Tyrrhenian trade circuit that included Sant-Embenia, Pithecus, and Etruria. And the Tyrrhenian trade network, it was that Aegean area near Sardinia that I had highlighted. That's called that body of water over there is called the Tyrrhenian Sea. But Carthage's interaction with Etruria or the Etruscans is very important, I believe, as well, because those of us that look into that, we know that the Etruscans also have a non-Indo-European origin. So there is evidence to show that the Etruscans were a melanated group of peoples, right? We've done work here to show that the Carthaginians were melanated peoples. When the war broke out, you could see the Greeks and the Romans on one side and the Etruscans and the Carthaginians on another side. So when you look at it, you literally had Greek and Romans, Indo-Europeans at war with Carthaginians and the Etruscans, non-Indo-Europeans. So friction that was divided along racial lines is nothing new, right? It's nothing to be squeamish about. And the competition between nations and racial groups is the story of history, right? And I'm describing it as competition specifically for a reason, because it is mainly a competition, right? And everyone has a right to compete. Next slide. So here is another piece from Canaan, Phoenicia, and Sidon. It says the name Phoenicians, by which this ethnos was known in ancient times and is still known in modern times, was not a self-denomination. It was given them by the Greeks. The Phoenicians preferred to call themselves Canaanites, right? They called themselves Canaanites and their country Canaan. Augustine writes, so that the Carthaginians' descendants in North Africa also called themselves Canaanites. So now we're putting it out there that the Phoenicians and Carthaginians called themselves Canaanites. It's not something that outside scholars are imposing on them going, from how their culture looks, we think they're Canaanites. No, there's evidence that shows these people called themselves Canaanites. So in an inscription of Kurta or Sirta, modern El Hofra, a man, possibly a Carthaginian or a Phoenician in general, is designated as a man of Canaan. And it gives the artifact number right there. Canaan, as the name of Phoenicia, is etched on the coin of the city of Byblos. So even the Phoenician city of Byblos, they etched Canaan on there. They didn't even put Byblos, right? Or Gabal on there, which is how you pronounce Byblos. This is by no means an accident. The Phoenicians were part of the Canaanite ethnos. So when we talk about that etymology of Canaan earlier from sa.neter's Phoenician history, this one is the etymology most of us are more familiar with. It says, in historical science, there were several interpretations of the term Canaan. It is often associated with the notion of purple or red color. Canaan is then understood as the purple land, and the Canaanites, inclusive Phoenicians, as red or purple people, right? They put in parentheses skinned and red-haired, but that is the scholars imposing that inference there. All of the indications of purple land. So why is it purple and land there? But when you talk about the people, it's red people. Why isn't it still purple people? Right? So that's how you can see they play games with the linguistics, because when it's referring to the land, it's purple. When it's referring to the people, it's red. So we can say they're red skinned and red haired. I don't think that accurately describes the phenotypes of the majority of the Canaanites. In this case, the term is congruous with the Greek name, also derived from the notion of red. The basis of this explanation of the name may be found in the manufacture of the Syro-Palestinian seashore of purple, so highly valued in antiquity. Really, the Hurrian word kiknaknu, right, is used in Mesopotamia. And our sa.neter source said that the term Canaan is transliterated from the Mesopotamian uses, right? So that's where you get the difference from Canaan and Cana, which seems to be the Levantine pronunciation of the word. Next slide. And here is an example of the Kurta steles or Sirta steles here, where the Carthaginians and Phoenicians proclaim they are men of Canaan, or one individual claimed to be a man of Canaan, right? So here's an example, and you can see the type of iconography they have there, symbol of Tanit in the middle there, the crescent moon, right, up at the top symbol. Next slide. So about this Mediterranean race, right, that they use. These here on the left are artifacts found from the Phoenician colonies. That first one there, the bust of the male figure, was specifically found in the Phoenician colony in Spain, right? So these are what these people are depicting themselves as. And these depictions here, even though these are from the Phoenician era and Carthaginian era, these depictions of these Semitic Canaanite peoples exactly match the genetic evidence and linguistic evidence that was presented earlier that speaks so much about Africa being the homeland of the Semitic language, about how these Natufian peoples and Ibero-Maurusian peoples and all of these ancestors of the Semitic peoples looked so African and were so African. It seems like even well into the Phoenician and Carthaginian period, they maintained those African phenotypes right here in the primary evidence. And that coin on the right-hand side at the top, the man with the locks, the twist, exactly how my locks started out. That coin was minted during the reign of Hannibal. That is a Carthaginian coin minted during the time period of Hannibal. And if we know anything about money, right, we're putting the rulers and leaders of the kingdom on the money. So even if that is not a depiction of Hannibal on that coin, that is meant to depict the ruling hegemony of Carthage. Next slide. So now we get to the group, right? Canaanites called Hyksos. So the Canaanites were farmers, not shepherds. The Israelites, on the other hand, were shepherds. The Canaanites believed that the fertility of the land was the work of their god Baal. However, around 2000 BCE, the Canaanites began to infiltrate the Egyptian delta and establish a local dynasty known as the Hyksos, or who have been colloquially termed shepherd kings. Next slide. Oh, and by the way, those people look very melanated as well. On that last slide. So Hekakasu, right? Hekakasu is the name that was given to these people. You can see the Medu Neter up there, the determinative for land and things like that, the hill country. And in the rendering here, foreign ruler or Hekakasu, that 3, right? It says HK3, H3, SWT. That 3 is meant to represent a vowel sound, the A or E vowel sound. This is where we get the term Hekakasu. That's going to be important in a few slides. Next, please. And thank you so much. Shout out sa.neter. Thank you so much for the platform. The apparent predilection for the mountain deity might favor the highlands of Palestine or Lebanon against the Negev, Shephelah, or inland Syria. So they're talking about these people being from the highlands, more up north, where the source said the Canaanite population was more heavily dense in that northern region. And one recalls in this connection the notice of the Christian chronographer Africanus, right, in the reproducing the epitome of Manetho, that the Hyksos hailed from Phoenicia or the north. Next slide. The true identity of the Hyksos can now easily be ascertained through the examination of 2 bodies of evidence, archaeological and linguistic. Hyksos sites in the eastern delta at Tel El Daba and Tel El Maskuta have revealed an intrusive culture whose ceramic and artifactual content differs not at all from the culture of the contemporary MB2B Palestine and Phoenicia. So that MB2B is a stratification layer that they were working on. It was talking about it earlier in the book. I didn't put it, it didn't have relevance in the presentation. But that MB2B is a stratification layer where they were having findings of Canaanite structures. So they're saying that Tel El Daba is synonymous with those Canaanite MB2B structures. And it says Egyptian texts from the time of the Wars of Liberation and the early 18th dynasty call these invaders Amu. You see that 3 there? That's why I highlighted that 3, and it's meant to represent an A sound, right? Because the contemporary Egyptians that were around at the time of the invasion of the Hyksos called those invaders Amu. We know who those Amu are, right? Next slide. So Tel El Dabah, it says archaeologist Manfred Bietek, right, from the Austrian Archaeological Institute in the 1980s, he proves Hibachi's hypothesis was confirmed. Bietek's mission revealed that the actual Hyksos capital was indeed Tel El Dabah. The nature of civilization at Tel El Dabah is understood from archaeological examination of the site. Excavations have discovered buildings, namely residences, tombs, and temples that combined Egyptian and Canaanite architectural styles, right? So the capital city, the archaeology, the temples, the dwellings were a mix of Egyptian and Canaanite styles. That's exactly what you would expect from this regular Canaanite culture that was oftentimes under the vassalage of the Egyptians. So the tomb styles and methods used by the dead in Tel El Dabah were Canaanite. The tomb styles were Canaanite, and they consisted of mud brick chambers and reflected a belief in the afterlife of the inhabitants, and it was similar to that of the Egyptians, which we know of the cultural diffusion. Next slide. So again, we're going to circle back to that etymology and the Semitic pronunciation of the word Canaan versus the Mesopotamian transliteration we use, Canaan, right? The Semitic peoples pronounced it Canaan. So this right here is a reproduction of the timelines of the Hyksos. They're comparing Josephus, Africanus, and Eusebius and their chronology of the Hyksos rulers. But what I want to point out is the names of the Hyksos ruler, right? In both Josephus's list and Africanus's list, the third ruler is named Pakana, right? And it's rendered, in the English rendering of it is Pakana. Donald Redford, who wrote this book, rendered this Pakana. It wasn't a Pak Canaan, it was Pakana. The same etymology given in sa.neter's Phoenician history. So the Hyksos and their naming system right here with Kana in the name shows, maintains, and preserves specifically the linguistic elements of northern Canaan. Exactly where sa.neter's Phoenician text is from that mentions this fictive ancestor Kana. These Hyksos are also using this eponym Kana, documented. So we also have Kana specifically preserved in the archaeological record. It's not just mythic. It's not just some mythical entity that appears in sa.neter's Phoenician history, reproduced by Philo and Eusebius and Aristophanes. It's no mistake. Kana is there in the cultural zeitgeist. Next slide. So, and also here, it's pointing out that a number of names aptly use the term Hyksos may be applied, and a handful of scarabs, mostly lacking preservance, provides evidence of 5, possibly 6 names. And in these names, they are theophoric names that contain the Canaanite deity Anat, right? You have Aper Anat, Anat Har, and Usur Anat. So they're even using theophoric names of the Canaanite deities. So their names have Kana in them, which we can trace back to northern Syria, right, near the Phoenician areas. That's why Josephus, or I believe Manetho, the slide said, assumed that the Hyksos were from Phoenicia, because all he knew is that they were from north, right? They were far up there in the north. Next slide. So it says, since 90% of our textual evidence on Canaanite religion comes from the late Bronze Age, the accuracy of our identifications and the propriety of our use of this evidence of the Middle Bronze Age may be questioned. He's being intellectually honest and modest. Nonetheless, it is usually assumed that there is a continuum in the tradition between the 7th century BC, the 17th century BC, and the 14th. Weight is added to this sanguine argument by the divine infixes in some of the Hyksos names. So he's going to talk about the theophoric name of Anat. Skipping down one, it says the latter is referred to as Anat, well known from the Ugaritic archives as the bloodthirsty consort of Baal. And presumably it is she that appears as a quasi-Hathor in certain Hyksos scarabs as mistress of the two trees. Right? So Anat, she's a key figure in the Canaanite pantheon, but she's also a key figure that the Hyksos bring down with them as well, right? So their preservance and recordation of Anat in their culture is a smoking gun that points out their northern Syrian Canaanite origins. Next slide. So from the material culture of the Hyksos, they are clearly Canaanites, right? The scarab beetles that were just talked about, but then also the material culture left behind representing the syncretized deity of Baal Seth Amun, right? And we're going to talk about syncretism a lot coming up. But here is another example, and I don't want to say Trinity, but a triple union of deities, Baal, Seth, Amun. So it is not out of the ordinary, right? We have an example of Baal Hadad, which is a syncretism of Baal and Hadad. We have Baal Hamon, which is a syncretism of Baal and Hamon. But we also have Baal Seth Amun, right? Which is a syncretism of three deities. This is going to become, relevant later on in the presentation. Next slide. So Hyksos and the Amorites, right? So based on based on the architecture and based on his archaeological findings, Manfred Bietek argues for strong parallels between the religious practices of the Hyksos at Avaris with those of the area around Byblos, Ugarit, Alak, and Tel Brak. This is the north, right? This is northern Canaan, very specific, very important. All of this is pointing to northern Canaan. The Hyksos were from northern Canaan. The Phoenicians located in northern Canaan. The source earlier said that in early times, the most densely populated region was northern Canaan, right? And also near the Jezreel Valley, I will repeat. So it says, and he defines the spiritual home of the Hyksos as in northernmost Syria and northern Mesopotamia, areas typically associated with Amorites at the time. That's interesting because remember before, the Egyptians called these people Amu. Next slide. Peace, y'all. So it says, Amorites, one of the people found in northern Syria and Mesopotamia from about 3000 BC, who also inhabited the land of Canaan before the Israelite conquest. The name derives from Martu, meaning west in Sumerian, and some believe that the Martu mentioned in Mesopotamian sources is the same as Amu in the contemporary Egyptian sources, like we were just talking about, where the reference is to wanderers who overran Syria and Palestine. Right? So the Martu referring to people of the West. Amu is implying people speaking from the West, right? So this Amu, Martu, is still sharing meaning, right? They're sharing meaning with being associated with West. Next slide, please. And the Amorites, there is thought to have been an Amorite presence in Egypt from the 19th century BC. The 14th dynasty of Egypt, centered in the Nile Delta, had rulers bearing Amorite names, such as Yakbim. Furthermore, increasing evidence suggests that the succeeding Hyksos of Egypt were an amalgam of peoples from Syria, of which the Amorites were also part. So modestly put here, the Amorites were at the very least a part of the mixed group that comprised of the Hyksos. Next slide. So it says, here are some references from the Bible about what we get on the Amorites. Genesis 15, Amorite is used to refer to the whole population in that area. In Genesis 48, Jacob claims to have taken some land from the Amorites, and the Amorites controlled much of Palestine and Transjordan, per Numbers 13:21 and Deuteronomy 17, Deuteronomy 1 and 7. 9, 20, and 44. The Israelites succeeded in taking much of the Amorite territory per Numbers, and but they remained in the hill country per Joshua. Next slide. So somewhat later, they are referred to in the Akkadian documents as Amuru, similar to Amu, similar to Martu, right? So these are the Amorites wholly that we are speaking about, which is very close to the biblical name during the 2nd millennium BC. The Amorites spread over large areas in Mesopotamia and east of the Jordan, pressing southwards and westwards. They reached their zenith in the middle of that same millennium. Next slide. It's about to heat up a little bit. So it says, somewhat later, they are referred to in the Akkadian documents as Amaru. Hold on. Next slide, Sa. Hammurabi, born in Babylon, now Iraq, right, was the 6th and best known ruler of the first Amorite dynasty of Babylon, noted for his surviving set of laws, once considered the oldest promulgation of laws in human history. So these Amorites are Canaanites. These Amorites are Canaanites who migrated down into Kemet as the Hyksos. But Hammurabi himself is an Amorite, right? Relating him to the Hyksos, right? And it is this Mesopotamian style of laws that they say, look, the Mesopotamians influenced the Semitic peoples because the Code of Hammurabi bears striking resemblance to the 10 Commandments. Well, given the fact that both groups of peoples share this Canaanite origin, this pan-Semitic tradition, right? Shout out to my brother Ashe, this pan-Semitic tradition, these sets of laws seem to be something coming from the Canaanite culture. So when Hammurabi produces his Amorite Canaanite Code of Hammurabi, and when the Israelites produce their Canaanite 10 Commandments, they look similar because they are both drawing from this value system that the Canaanites share, whether they are the Canaanites of Israel producing the 10 Commandments, or whether they are the Canaanites of Babylon as the Amorites producing Hammurabi's code. So a lot of these similarities that we see between the Mesopotamian tradition and the Bible tradition is because they have a shared Canaanite identity. Next slide. So a discovery was made with these Amorites at a place where these Amorites were located in 1902 by British archaeologist Stuart McAllister, excavating at Gezer, which we mentioned earlier. It's located in Israel between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and is mentioned in the Bible. So as he was digging and unearthing the 12 standing stones or pillars, he realized he was excavating a Canaanite high place, specifically an Amorite Canaanite high place, where the ancient inhabitants worshiped their gods. McAllister describes a pit with a great number of bones of human beings in a confused heap, and nearby a young girl who had been sawn asunder. Let's see what they mean by sawn asunder. Next slide. The skulls of 2 young girls who had been decapitated. This was determined due to the cut marks on the vertebrae. All around the feet of the columns of the standing stones, McAllister discovered the skeletons of young infants. They were deposited in large jars, and the skeletons showed marks of fire, right? With this, in the process of this sacrificial tradition. So they were really doing that thing, right? They was Canaanites for real out here, right? That's not just slander. That's not just an extreme claim made to make us look negatively upon these Canaanites. They was doing this for real. Next slide. But interestingly enough, right? In Ezekiel 16, thus saith the Lord unto Jerusalem, thy birth and thy nativity is of the land of Canaan. Thy father was an Amorite, and thy mother a Hittite. So the Lord is saying to Jerusalem, your father was an Amorite. And in the Hebrew tradition, how do the Hebrews work with genetics? You are what your father is. So the Lord is even telling you, use an Amorite, use a sacrifice in Amorite, speaking straight to Jerusalem. And modern scholars argue that Israelites branched out of the Canaanite peoples. Just the question you was asking earlier, Sa. Modern scholars argue that the Israelites branched out of the Canaanite peoples and culture through the development of a distinct monolatrous, we're going to look into detail in that, and later monotheistic religion centered on El/Yahweh. And I give a definition from Webster's Dictionary: nativity, the process or circumstances of being born. Next slide. So, what's going on with this sacrificial system in the Bible? Exodus 34, the first offspring from every womb belongs to me, and all your male livestock, the first offspring from cattle and sheep. Now, this is the Lord calling for this, saying that the first offspring from every womb belongs to me. What? Right? And then he specifies when he's talking about the livestock. So in that first statement, the first offspring from every womb belongs to me. He's talking about human wombs. Okay, so this is the Lord calling for the offspring of people. In Exodus 13, you shall devote to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. Again, using that term, from every womb. A human womb and animal womb. And the first offspring of every beast. So look again, it says, first offspring of every womb and the first offspring of every beast you own. Meaning those first sentences, when he says every womb, he's talking about humans. He's talking about that thing, right? And this is now Yahweh, the God of the Bible, calling for this onto his people, not condemning it. This is in Exodus. He's not condemning this sacrificial system. He's calling for it. In 2 Kings, though, then he took his oldest son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. Just smeared it on the wall. But that burnt aspect, right? The archaeologist McAllister said he saw the skeletons had burns on them. And even in the Bible, when it's describing this practice, it says, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. Genesis 22. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, making him the firstborn of the womb, right? Whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. Burn him, right? The same burnt offering that we see in 2 Kings, and the same burnt offering that was found in the archaeological record by the archaeologist McAllister, where the skeletons were burnt at Gezer. And then the God of the Bible is now requiring Abraham to specifically burn Isaac in this sacrifice. So the continuity, I wanted to hone in on that detail because that's a small detail in the larger cultic practice of this sacrifice. But consistently, we see that fire. Consistently, we see that burning. Next slide. In 2 Kings, Manasseh also sacrificed his son in the fire. Manasseh sacrificed his son in the fire, right? So that is a key aspect of this. That marks it Canaanite. And he practiced sorcery, divination, and he consulted with mediums. Now look, this is a shot for the Christians. Question for the Christians. Jesus being the Son of God, being begotten by God, right? This also would imply that Jesus is God's child. This means God sent his child to be sacrificed for salvation. This means Jesus himself is a child sacrifice, and the salvation through Christ is a salvation through child sacrifice. Christians, what are we talking about here? right? So you see a continuity of this Canaanite spiritual system, salvation through the killing of a child. It's the Christians fight so you know that Jesus is God's child. And we throw right out that God sent this child to be sacrificed. Yet all through the Bible, you want to condemn the Canaanites for doing the same child sacrifice. No, 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 no. All of this is Canaanite culture. And even within the Bible, you see in Exodus the affirmation and calling for of child sacrifice. Then Abraham was called to do a Canaanite child sacrifice. Then this whole theology wraps up in the New Testament with God performing a child sacrifice. The whole New Testament is the romanticizing of a Canaanite child sacrifice of your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, salvation coming through the sacrifice of God's child. This is Canaanite all the way through, all the way through. Next slide, please. And it says here, and just to add, since we're on the topics of the Christians, for the Canaanites, unlike the Egyptians with whom they had commercial contacts and by whom they were influenced, did not believe that the king was a god. To be son of God in this Canaanite tradition was to remain human, like Arius said, right? That long conflict in Christianity about the divinity of Christ. What was the nature of Christ's divinity? Was he human? With just perfect actions? Was he half human and half divine? Was he all divine, just appearing human? Well, in the Canaanite tradition that all of this stems from, to be the son of God was to remain human, just so you know. Next slide. And now we get to Israel and Judah, these Canaanite kingdoms, right? And this is when the Canaanites were organized under a central monarchy, right? We think of Canaanites in the city-state days, and there's a disassociation from Canaanites in a central monarchy. But Israel and Judah, along with Moab, Ammon, and Edom, represent the Canaanite central monarchies. Next slide, please. And this seal, Hezekiah's seal. And there's certain things where when the Israelites are trying to, prove themselves and show themselves, Hezekiah is a king mentioned in the Bible. Hezekiah has been established in the archaeological record. Why do we not hear more about Hezekiah? Well, look at what Hezekiah was doing, right? Hezekiah's seals, it features the Egyptian scarab beetle. And we know it's Hezekiah's seal because it says that, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. Hezekiah and Ahaz are both mentioned in the Bible, right? So this is confirmation here. But look at this paganism and polytheistic representation. From what we know of the Canaanites who embraced the Egyptian culture and spiritual system, this is exactly what Hezekiah's seals show. That how the Canaanites are described, Hezekiah and the Israelite kingdom are practicing this same thing. The material culture left behind by Israel is a material culture that you would expect to see of any old regular Canaanite, which would be a mixture of Semitic and Egyptian themes. Next slide. The Merneptah stela, right? Merneptah, son of Ramesses II. So he talks about his conquest in the Levant, right? So he talks about the Tehenu, the Hatti, plundered is the land, is the Canaan, right? Carried off is Ashkeloni. It mentions Gezer, Yenoam. Then it gets down and it says Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. Then it also mentions the Karu, right? But I want to draw attention, alternative to the reading Israel have been put forward since the stele was discovered. People have been saying that the candidate for that word could also be Jezreel, right? A city and valley in northern Canaan, exactly where all of the research has been pointing us, right? Since the beginning, it said the most densely populated areas of Canaan where the activity was going on, where all of the political establishment was going on, was in the north. Specifically, Jezreel was mentioned multiple times here. So based off of the material culture and what was going on at the time, it does seem, and from the inscription here, the epigraphic evidence, since this stele was discovered, scholars have been saying the epigraphic evidence suggests that Jezreel is what's really being said there. And the cultural context of just how Canaan was set up, the population density, all of it also points to Jezreel being inscribed on the Merne Patah stela and not Israel. Next slide. The Moabite stone, the Mesha stele. So this is for the Moors, right? All my Moabites out there. The Mesha stele, also known as the Moabite stone, is a stele dated around 840 BCE, containing a significant Canaanite inscription. The Moabite stone is a Canaanite inscription in the name of King Mesha of Moab. Mesha tells how Chemosh, a Canaanite god, the god of Moab, had been angry with his people and had allowed them to be subjugated to the kingdom of Israel. But at length, Chemosh returned and assisted Mesha to throw off the yoke of Israel and restore the lands of Moab. But the Mesha stele, the first major epigraphic Canaanite inscription found in the southern Levant, the longest Iron Age inscription ever found in that region, constitutes major evidence for the Moabite language and is a cornerstone of Semitic epigraphy and history. So this is important, but repeatedly wants you to know this is Canaanite, that the Moabites were Canaanites. Chemosh was a Canaanite deity. So when you're a Moor, claiming Moabite and Mozabite, and this identity right here, you also have to know that these people are also Canaanites, which I know for a fact there were groups called Canaan land Moors. So I feel like the Moors were more receptive to this Canaanite reality than maybe the Hebrew Israelites were. Next slide. This is Dr. Kip Davis, who worked on the excavation and translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Psalms 82 at the bottom there, it says, God stood up in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And Dr. Kip Davis's opinion on this is, I think this is one of these sorts of texts which provides really clear indication that there is a pantheon of deities. So straight out of Psalms here, the expert, right, the linguist doing the translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the comparative analysis is saying in Psalms 82 and 1 here, this is clear indication that a pantheon is being referred to in the Old Testament. Next slide, please. So in this pantheon, who would have been found? Asherah/Ashtaroth we put forth. So in 1 Kings, because they have forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the sons of Ammon, right? Again, pay attention to that term, sons of Ammon. And we already went over the etymology of Ammon, Hammon, and Ham, to where the verbiage sons of Ammon is used the same as the verbiage sons of Ham. Sorry, that's a side note. But if you look, Ashtaroth of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the sons of Ammon, those are other Canaanite deities and Canaanite city-states that they are referencing and polemicizing against, right? So what I want to also point out is that this polemic of these gods that are specifically being named and specifically being polemicized or argued against are always these Canaanite deities, because it's wholly a Canaanite conversation in Judges. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. In Judges 10, then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, and the gods of Moab. the gods of the sons of Ammon and the gods of the Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord. Next slide, please. And more of the Canaanite culture and cultic practice are the Asherah poles that show up. In Deuteronomy, you shall not plant for yourself an Asherah of any kind of tree besides the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself, because the Asherah poles are also associated with trees. Yeah, the Asherah pole or the Asherah tree. They've abandoned all the commands of Yahweh. This is 2 Kings. They abandoned all the commands of Yahweh, their God, and made for themselves 2 molten calf-shaped idols. The calf or the cow were symbols of 1, the Canaanite god El, or 2, the Canaanite god Baal. So they are making these molten calf-shaped idols. They made a pole of Asherah worship and bowed down to the army of the heavens and served Baal. In 1 Kings, then send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah. 2 Kings again, they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, with which he made Israel sin, but walked in them, and the Asherah also remained standing in Samaria. Next slide. So here's a depiction of the Asherah poles or the Asherah tree. And some scholars have put forth that there is a striking resemblance between the shape, the general shape and motif of that Asherah tree with what later becomes the menorah. Next slide, please. Now, one of these Canaanite deities, another Canaanite deity is Yarek, the moon god, right? The worship of the moon god was most likely practiced in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, both before the Babylonian captivity and afterwards. Evidence includes toponyms, according to Gabriel Thuer, theophoric names invoking Yarek. Best known presumed examples for the former include Jericho. So Jericho or Yariko, right, and Beth Yarek are theophoric names that preserve this Yarek moon deity worship. Next slide.
All right. Before I get to the next slide, I got to let you know, brother, I got another show at 9 o'clock, and it's pertaining to the Canaanites as well. And that's going to be on the Coliseum. So you might want to come over there and see what the brother's talking about. He's definitely knowledgeable as well. And if you want to have question and answers, we could stop now on number 87 and finish off on another date, like on a Friday or something for part 2. It's up to you. But if you want to continue, we can keep going. But I know you would like people to come in and probably ask you questions. So if you keep going,
I'm sure they're gonna come through and get at me on the next one. But how everything lines up, I gotta just go through this right here.
Okay, all right,
you know what I mean?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
No problem. I appreciate that, Sa. Speaking of Jericho, speaking of Yarek, right? Kathleen Kenyon, in Digging Up Jericho, published in the Cambridge Sentinel, also found evidence of the Canaanite cultic practice of sacrifice at Jericho as well. Next slide. Shalem, the evening star, Canaanite, a god in the Canaanite religion mentioned in the inscriptions in Ugarit called Rosh Hashanah. William F. Albright identified Shalem as the god of dusk and Shahar as the god of the dawn, right? And in the book, The Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, Venus is represented by Shalem as the evening star and Shahar as the morning star. So when you hear of the evening star, morning star, star of the morning verbiage in the Bible, it definitely has a Canaanite Semitic origin as well, right? And during the Canaanite period in the 14th century, Jerusalem was named Jerusalem on ancient Egyptian tablets. And in Semitic, it was rendered Yarushalem, Y-R-Y Shalem, meaning cornerstone or city of Shalem, after the Canaanite deity. Also, it not only was Jerusalem named after Shalem, Solomon is a theophoric name of Shalemin, and Abshalom, right? So not only in Masonry, in the order, and I'm talking about the Freemasons Masonry, right? Not only do you have the Canaanite, Phoenician, Hiram Abiff as a central figure, Solomon, aka Shalemin, right, who carries the theophoric name of this Canaanite deity, is also central to the Masonry tradition. So at the center of Masonry's tradition is this Canaanite tradition, right? So the Christians got some answering to do with this child sacrifice thing with Jesus. The Masons, I think we've stumbled upon a little secret that maybe they know and don't let out to the people. So the list is piling up here, right, of people who are at their root practicing this Canaanite tradition. Next slide, please. Sedek, who's mentioned in sa.neter's Phoenician history and is actually the father of Eshmun that was mentioned earlier, is a pagan god that is related to the Amorite deity known as Isar and the Babylonian deity Kittu, right? So, and thus a hypostasis or underlying substance or the personification of the sun god Shamash's function as the divine overseer of justice. So this was Sedek's function. Over time, the Semitic deity Sedek became an attribute of the God of the Israelites and a root of one of the names of the heroes of the Old Testament, Melchizedek, for which the Melchizedek priesthood is named. Next slide. So evidence for this deity in the biblical text is persuasive, and perhaps the most conclusive is a statement by Philo of Byblos, the same Philo of Byblos from sa.neter's Phoenician history that I've been referencing. Philo of Byblos that the Phoenicians had a god named Sedek, i.e. Zedek, right? Philo, who claimed to get his information from the Phoenician writer sa.neter, noted that the Phoenicians numbered among their gods Misor and Sedek, that is easy to loosen and righteousness, right? And the verb Sedek right here means to be just or righteous, which is a term that comes from the Phoenician god Sedek. So the Hebrew rendering of just isolating the attribute of righteousness, it stems from this Canaanite god Sedek, who was the god of righteousness. Next slide, please. And Melchizedek and the Canaanite priesthood. Melchizedek is an old, and this reference is from Encyclopedia Britannica. Melchizedek is an old Canaanite name. It's an old Canaanite name. It means my king is, and in parentheses, the God Sedek. My king is the God Sedek. But when you read it in the Hebrew dialect, it is rendered my king is righteousness. So that's the Hebrew cognate. But the original rendering and meaning for this is my king is Sedek, in reference to the God. And the God whom Melchizedek serves is priest is El Elyon, again, a name of Canaanite origin, probably designating the high God of the pantheon. So, and for Abraham to recognize the authority and authenticity of a Canaanite priest king is startling and has no other parallel in biblical literature. So this is important. Melchizedek was practicing some sort of priesthood associated with El Elyon, which is an epithet for the Canaanite god. His name means my king is some Canaanite god. He was practicing this priesthood before Abraham came. Abraham is the first Hebrew. Melchizedek was practicing this before Abraham came on the scene. So whatever Melchizedek was practicing was not Hebrew, because Abraham is the first Hebrew, right? This is important. And then through the Zadok priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood, this gets handed down to Abraham and the later Hebrews. So there is spiritually and cultically substantiated through the Bible a transmission of Canaanite to Hebrew through Melchizedek. And didn't they say Jesus came in the order of Melchizedek? Jesus, this Canaanite sacrifice, came in the order of Melchizedek, this Canaanite priest. So come on, Christians. It's not just the Hebrew Israelites whose origins is in this Canaanite thing, right? Christians, your Christianity is also rooted in philosophy in this Canaanite system.
You know, I was going to ask you that too, and you already answered it before I even asked you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, brother.
Yes, sir. Next slide. Gad, right? Pronounced G-O-D, pronounced with that type of A sound, was the name of a pan-Semitic god of fortune, usually depicted as a male, but sometimes as a female. It's an androgynous deity, and is attested in ancient records of Aram and Arabia as having been worshipped by a number of Hebrews during the Babylonian captivity. And it is possible that the son of Jacob named Gad is named after Gad, or that Gad is a theophoric name. Right. So how widespread the cult of the Gad deity was in Canaanite times is inferred from the names Baal Gad as a city at the foot of Mount Hermon, and Migdal Gad as a territory in Judah. Also, there are people with the theophoric name Gad, like Gadai and Gadiel, in the tribes of Manasseh and Zebulun, per Numbers chapter 13, verse 10 through 11. Next slide. And that brings me to the interesting relationship that the Hebrew tribe names have with Canaanite deities and heroes. Because we know Judah contains Yah being connected to the Canaanites. The tribe Asher is from the Canaanite deity Asherah. Gad, the tribe Gad, like we just said, is from Gad, the Canaanite deity. Dan is from the Canaanite hero Danel. Danel is not a deity, but he's a hero mentioned in the Ugaritic text in the story of Akat. And actually in Ezekiel, it mentions this Danel, and believers and religious scholars have just said that they meant Daniel. But really, there is a Danel in this tradition, and the tribe of Dan is named after this Danel. Levi, Leviathan, Israel, or Yasher Allah, we know has L in it, and Benjamin contains Yam, right? Ben Yamin is the figure Yam. So the when you talk about the relation of the Israelites with the Canaanites, half of their tribes are named after Canaanite figures. You can't hide from that. You can't get away from that. Half of your tribes are named after Canaanite deities and heroes.
Yes.
So come on. This thing goes way deep with this Canaanite culture. The Israelites are Canaanites. Next slide.
First of all, let me say, man, this is definitely powerful. And I hope when the Israelites look at this, they don't look at it as you banging. I hope they learn from it. I hope Apostle is not too old to learn new stuff, man, and don't be so combative. Yes. Learn this stuff, brother. My brother Apostle, my big brother Apostle.
So some of the earliest attestations of Yahweh, right? You have the Kuntalit Ajord artifact here, and then most of us are familiar with the Sashu inscription where it says, Tai Sashu Yehuah, the Sashu of Yahweh, right? So we know this deity was floating around. Next slide. So about the polytheism in the text, right? Within a lot of the text of the Bible, what we see is a picture of Yahweh who is in process of sort of assuming control of the pantheon of deities. He's becoming king of the god. So in the biblical text, it's the story of Yahweh becoming the king of the gods over all others. That's why there's so much dictation of don't put no God before me. Remember, it's all about me. Hey, yo, I'm above all everybody else. Because the text is about his ascendancy above these other deities.
Woo!
No doubt. That's the same story you find in the Baal cycle. The Baal cycle of the Ugaritic text is the story of Baal taking kingship. So there are so many similarities and borrowings that Yahweh does from Baal specifically. And it's down to even the motive of the text to show that this deity is taking control of the council in front of the gods. He holds judgment. So what we see in these texts at Ugarit is a reflection of a lot of the stuff we find with the Bible, but featuring some of the same characters, but also some different characters. Next slide, please. So this is Yahweh Among the Baals, Israel and the Storm Gods by Daniel E. Fleming. And it says, what will Baal do without Mark Stratton Smith to preserve and respect his memory in a monotheistic world, determined to exclude and exhortate him. Thank you. The very name evokes idolatry and an alternative to the true God, aptly called pagan. Yet Baal is the Lord, a perfectly serviceable monotheistic title when rendered by the Hebrew Adonai or the Greek Kyrios. So when you want to use Baal to just mean Lord or Adonai, then it's okay. Biblical writers managed to let Yahweh and El converge into one, meaning the biblical writers told you we are going to mix El and Yahweh. I came as El, but I'm really Yahweh. So the biblical writers were fine with blatantly combining El and Yahweh, these two different gods. The common expression, but Baal could not join the convergence, and I would add public convergence. Even if Psalms 29 could have Yahweh thunder as a storm god, Mark has had much to say about the religion of Israel and its world, and we need not assume Baal to be his favorite. But perhaps Mark's deep familiarity with Baal suits an analysis of Israel that embraces what the Bible treats as taboo. So we're going to explore what the Bible is treating as taboo. For this occasion, it is a privilege to contribute a reflection on God's early history. The God of the Bible has a history in his footsteps to honor his work in appreciation of our friendship. So the author here, Daniel E. Fleming, is trying to honor and expand upon the work done by Mark Smith. And I know your audience is familiar with Mark Smith from the conversations. Next slide. So it says, so this idea that Yahweh was the God of Israel, he was the only God of Israel, and from the beginning of time, it was always Yahweh and no one else. But that's not what we see in the archaeological record, Dr. Kit Davis goes on to say. And then after looking at the archaeological record and coming back to the text and reevaluating what you see in the text, you start to realize that's not even what we see in the text either. Next slide. So what is he talking about? Right? We're talking about this competitor. It hasn't always been Yahweh and just Yahweh and only Yahweh, right? In 2 Kings, he built the high places which Hezekiah, his father, had destroyed, and he erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah as Ahab, king of Israel, had done and worshiped. In 2 Kings again, they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah and worshipped all the hosts of the heaven and served Baal. So that this term hosts of the heavens and served Baal, these hosts of the heavens is supposed to imply polytheism, right? And deities with Baal that you shouldn't be worshiping. But it's funny though, and I'm pointing out here the term Eldu Yahweh Sabaoth. The term Eldu Yahweh Sabaoth means Yahweh, the creator of the hosts, the creator of the hosts, right? So you see here, these hosts are meant to mean polytheism. But in the same tradition, it will proclaim that Yahweh is the creator of the hosts, pointing back and hearkening back to the fact that Yahweh is in position amongst this divine council. So using that Eldu Yahweh Sabaoth, or El, the creator of the host, El, the creator of the host, is pointing back to this pantheon. El, the creator of these other deities, those same other deities that are being condemned in 2 Kings. In Judges, it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take my father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath. And Samuel and the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth and served Jehovah only. So the children of Israel had to put away the Baals and Ashtaroth because they were not only just serving Yahweh. And there was no time where you see only Yahweh being worshiped. Then they go off and worship multiple gods, then come back to Yahweh. You do not find that order of events. You do find them worshiping multiple gods from the beginning, Yahweh getting introduced, then eventually this long drawn out process of only worshiping Yahweh.
my queen been teaching this for a while, and Hebrews bang on her when she teaches this. They don't want the truth to come out. So you're on point right now, brother. Next slide.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right? In Jeremiah, through their dreams that they tell one another, they plan to cause my people to forget my name as their fathers forgot my name through Baal worship. Right? So this is the text trying to tell a population, you guys forgot about me. That's why you were worshiping Baal. But that's not what the record shows. That's not what any of the evidence says. So you can see here, the biblical text is clearly telling the people what to think about their history, telling these people what to think about this new system it's trying to introduce. In 2 Kings, Jehu eliminated Baal worship from Israel. In Zephaniah, I will attack Judah, all who live in Jerusalem. I will remove from this place every trace of Baal worship, because there was rampant Baal worship in Jerusalem, as well as the very memory of the pagan priests. In 1 Kings, then, as if following the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, were a trivial matter, he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and then proceeded to serve Baal and worship. Next slide. So you see again the Sidonians as well, Phoenicians being associated with Baal worship, being associated with this Canaanite structure. So a wedge is trying to be drawn between the Canaanites, the Canaanite people and their practice, and this group called the Hebrews, this group called the Israelites.
We up to 101 slide, bro.
Oh, we in the home stretch.
Man, wow.
We in the home stretch. And we just got into the Israel stuff. Right? So this is the book Stories from Ancient Canaan by Michael David Coogan. Sorry, it took me so long to cite this book and shout it out. But as this brief overview has shown, Canaanite motifs are ubiquitous in the Bible. Most significant is the fusion of Baal language and El language in the descriptions of Yahweh, right? So when the Bible is describing Yahweh, low key, it's really using borrowed Baal language, borrowed El language, right? The God of Israel may be unique, but the formula, Yahweh was created and concocted with a formula, right? So, but the formula with which Israel expressed her understanding of him were not, meaning were not unique. The more we learn of the cultural context in which the Israelites lived, the more the prophetic remark rings true, and they repeat the Ezekiel passage. By origin and by birth, you are of the land of the Canaanites. Next slide. And it says here, this is some of the Baal language that they're talking about, right? And it says, let me tell you, Prince Baal, let me repeat, rider on the clouds, right? Yahweh and Baal were both called rider on the clouds. But look, it says, behold your enemy Baal. Then in Psalms, it says, behold your enemy Yahweh. It says, behold, you will kill your enemy. And it says, behold, your enemies have perished. And again, it says, behold, you will annihilate your foes. Then it says, evildoers have been scattered. Right. And it continues to say in the Baal cycle, you will take your eternal kingship. In Psalms, it says your kingdom is an eternal kingdom. Next, it says your dominion forever and ever. And in Psalms, it says your rule is forever and ever. So this is the syncretism that happens. Right. This is what we mean by the syncretism. This is what's meant by Baal language. Right? This is behold your enemies, and kill your enemies have perished. All of this language is implying the same thing. The cadence rhythmically said, the stanza set up in the same way. Next slide. So more Baal language, right? There was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud on the mountain, and Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because Yahweh had descended upon it in fire, and the whole mountain quaked violently, and that's Exodus. So it says the same imagery is used of Baal's theophany. Then Baal opened a slit in the clouds. Baal sounded his holy voice. Baal thundered from his lips. The earth's high places shook. So you see the same thing about the clouds, thundering sound, shaking, high places, mountains, shaking, all of these elements and themes here. This is the syncretism. This is Baal language, right? The association of Yahweh as storm god with the mountain of elevation is echoed in Judges. Yahweh, when you set out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth quaked and the heavens shook and the clouds shook water. The mountains shuddered before Yahweh, the one of Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. So this is what we mean by the borrowing in Baal language. Next slide. So the character of the God of Israel is thus a composite. While Yahweh is primarily an El figure, which is why the Bible text is an ascendancy of him as king of the gods, replacing El, many of the images and formulae that distinguish him from El are adopted from the theology of Baal. And it is significant that the revelation of the name of Yahweh, symbolizing a dramatic change in Israel's understanding of and relationship with her God, is set in the period of the Exodus and conquest. For it was when Israel made the transition from a semi-nomadic to a sedentary and eventually urban way of life that it passed from the milieu of the patriarchs who worshiped El, a patriarchal tent dweller, to the world of the Canaanite city-states and kingdoms, whose chief divinity was Baal, young, active, and living in a house. Right? So it's talking about the evolution of the Canaanite culture and context and the different peoples in their way of life, the city dwellers versus the ruralists, the pastoralists, the agriculturalists, right? And what aspects of the Canaanite pantheon suited your life when you were a pastoralist versus what aspects of the theology suited your life in the city. Now, next slide. Thank you. So the Hebrew Bible texts, as we have them, are quite a bit later than is often assumed, right? Meaning people assume that the Bible text comes from so far back in antiquity, 2000 BC, 1500 BC, the Bronze Age. What the evidence says, though, he says, I think a lot of this stuff you can date pretty clearly to the same period of time, to the post-Babylonian period, meaning after the Babylonian period. That's the Persian era. Then he said to the post-Persian period, meaning after the Persian period. That's a very damning statement right there. So he's not even sure if this stuff dates back to after the Babylonian period, which would put it smack dab in the Persian period. Then he says some of it, he said it dates back to the post-Persian period, meaning after the Persian period. And so we're going to get to what comes after the Persian period, after we examine the Persian period first. It says archaeologists started to discover that the picture through the artifacts, the artifactual culture, the material culture actually look pretty different from what the Bible says. Next slide. So the archaeological record does not support what the Bible says, right? It is not, in my opinion, an unrelated phenomenon that a generation later under Merneptah, an entity called Israel with all the characteristics of a Shasu enclave, makes its appearance probably in the Ephraimitic highlands. And the strengthened presence of the Egyptians in such towns as Beth She'an and Deir Allah must be seen in the light of their recent settlement in the uplands. So he's pointing out, right, the activities and conquest that the Egyptians had. And he's talking about examining Beth She'an and Deir Allah. Dr. Kip Davis talks about the archaeological record not supporting what the Bible says. Let's analyze Deir Allah and see if it supports the Bible. Next slide.
Hey, let me tell you, next slide is coming up right here. But before you go in, I'm going to let you know, Apostle is having a fit right now. I just got off the phone with him and he is going crazy. I said, brother, the brother's he's showing you the sources, but he over there going crazy. I know. All
the sources. Part 2 will be the question and answer portion. You know what I mean? That they could confront me on the information on the part 2. Part 1, I'm doing the whole presentation though. They got to digest this.
Right, go ahead, brother.
The Deir Allah inscription right here, right? It's a depiction of Baalam, right? Balaam. And it differs from that in the book of Numbers, because Balaam is a figure, and the story of Balaam is in the Bible, right? Balaam's God is associated in the Dear Allah inscription. Balaam's God is associated with the goddess Sagar wa Ishtar, right? And this is a combination of two different deities with the name Sagar and Ishtar or Astar. And they're certainly known to history, but quite separately. These are pagan gods. So the Balaam in the Dear Allah inscription is a worshiper of pagan gods. The enigmatic narrative also foregrounds the Shaddaiin, right? Or the Shadu, those Shaddai gods. The Shadu that my brother Ashe was talking about. Here's the primary evidence from the Dear Allah inscription of the Shaddaiin or Shaddai gods. They establish a council, right? So it also features the word Elohim, taken to mean gods, plural. Next slide, Sa. So the story of Balaam in the book of Numbers is based off of, or is a retelling of, this original polytheistic Dear Allah inscription. It was written in a northwestern Semitic dialect. It's provoked much debate among scholars and had a strong impact on the study of Canaanite and Aramaic inscriptions. So on the wall, which was written a story relating visions of Balaam's son of Beor, a seer of the gods, the same name as Balaam, son of Beor in Numbers. So we are talking about the same person here. Even the patronymic, right? Naming his father, Balaam, son of Beor, being in Numbers, and Balaam, son of Beor, being in the Dear Allah inscription. We can clearly see that the book of Numbers is trying to retell the Dear Allah inscriptions just without the polytheistic portion. So this is the Canaanite source material, the polytheistic source material that you get Numbers from. Next slide, please. I was about to say next inscription. So here is Israel Finkelstein. I know most of us are familiar with Israel Finkelstein. He wrote the book, The Bible Unearthed, conducted archaeological survey in Israel on this search for the biblical narrative. This theory from A to Z of a migration from the north is not accepted anymore today. It was a nice theory, but there is no backing. The people of the beginning of the second millennium BC, they are all from a local stock. So there was no migration from the north that you can relate Abraham to. The migration never happened. Next slide. So the Tomb of the Patriarchs. This is a statement by Avi Ofer, head of the Judean Highland expedition. But what is most important for our aim here is the bedrock here. This is the natural bedrock from the time of the Canaanite period, from the time of the settlement period, and so on. And in this bedrock, all around this bedrock were cut tombs during the Canaanite period. This was the cemetery of the town. So this is the source of the tradition, which is not historical, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried here. But he says that because this was a Canaanite cemetery in the town, this is where the tradition comes from, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried there. And it's just because it's been an established fact that Canaanite peoples had been burying their peoples here throughout history. Next slide. So there was no migration. There is no Tomb of the Patriarchs. And here is a quote from Donald Redford, the author of Canaan, Israel, and Egypt in Ancient Times that I've been quoting from. All over the Eastern Delta and in the Sinai and in the Negev. Donald Redford is an archaeologist, by the way, so we're referencing all the archaeology. And up in the Negev and further north, there were permanent Egyptian garrisons and garrison points, checkpoints. And we have records of the letters that were sent back and the reports of such police on the comings and goings and of wandering people. Certainly, there would have been no chance whatsoever for a group of people that large to move freely through the desert and into the Negev. Not a chance at all. So he's speaking against the Exodus. Because there were so many Egyptian garrisons and policings and reports, there was no way that an Exodus could have been wandering through the desert without the Egyptians reporting and confronting these people. Next slide, Sa. And this is from Donald Redford's book. So basic to the discussion are three theses: that Israel did not originate in an ethnically distinct element, right, at the beginning outside of Canaan, spatially and culturally, but was from the outset essentially of the same stock as the Canaanites that the Israelites were. Continues on, not infiltrating pastoralists, but a sedentary agricultural part of Canaanite society, and that the creation of the political entity Israel resulted from a violent rejection of the Canaanite city-state system, with its mechanisms of taxation, impressment, and the corvée. Right? So what he's saying is that Israel formed from Canaanites rejecting the city-state structure with the taxation, and how the Canaanite elite were in the pockets of the Egyptians as well. Next slide. So it says, when from all accounts, Israel should have been passing through its formative stage, is nothing but a late development of an essentially Canaanite culture. Nothing specifically Israelite can be discerned. This is from the archaeologist and Egyptologist Donald Redford, right? Author of the book Canaan, Egypt, and Israel, Canaan, and Egypt in Ancient Times. Next slide. Again, from Israel Finkelstein. The conclusion is, when we look at Jericho, Jericho was not inhabited in the 13th century BC, probably. And anyway, there are no fortifications. So where are the big walls of Jericho? In recent times, I think they have found more evidence of fortifications since this statement has been made, just to be honest. And the case of Jericho applies also for the other places mentioned in the tradition, right, of the conquest in the book of Joshua. Many of the cities mentioned were not inhabited at all in the late Bronze Age. Right. So the Bible is trying to make a claim of a conquest, when really in the archaeological record at the time the Bible claims that conquest happened, some of the cities were not even inhabited at that time. Seems like the author of the Bible was not quite accurate of the time period it attempts to describe in the Bronze Age. Next slide. Continuing on with this claim of Solomonic construction, what we see now is the famous six rooms gate here in Gezer. There's a similar gate in Hatzor. There's a similar gate in Megiddo. And these three gates were thought to be because of the passage in the book of Kings. These three gates were thought to be the gates that Solomon built, the blueprint of the Solomonic architecture. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. It doesn't fit because there are gates like that also in other sites which are not Solomonic in any way. Ashdod, it's a Philistine city. Terbatash, it's on the border between Philistine and Israel. And there's a later gate in Lachish. So it's more likely a fashion of the Iron Age gates than something that singles out Solomonic building. So even this in the architecture where it goes, look, this has to be a symbol of Solomonic architecture and the Temple of Solomon, and this is what it reflects. Wrong. It's merely the style of the Iron Age gate, specifically in the Canaan and Levantine region. Next slide, please. So again, from Israel Finkelstein, the idea of a great Davidic or Solomonic empire in the 10th century BC is absolutely ridiculous. So because an empire needs a capital, there's almost nothing in Jerusalem, a very small village. An empire needs manpower. There's nothing in Judah. It's a few small villages. An empire needs administration. There's no administration. There's no scribal activity. So where is the empire? So the infrastructure needed for some Davidic kingdom, for some empire, it's just not there, right? That political entity did not exist in that capacity. Israel existed, Judah existed, but it wasn't an empire. It wasn't conquestuous. It wasn't popping like that at that time. Next slide, please. So again, it says archaeologists started to discover that the picture through the artifacts the artifactual culture, the material culture look pretty different from what the Bible actually says. Back to that statement. Next slide, please. So what is there? What can we trace, right? So let's get to Ur of Kasdan, and it says, and Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So that dates things, right? Chaldea came to be used in a wider sense of southern Mesopotamia in general, following the brief ascendancy of the Chaldeans during 608 to 557 BC. This is especially the case in the Hebrew Bible. So when you hear Ur of Kasdan or Ur of the Chaldees, it's specifically talking about a time period in Babylonia, in Mesopotamia, during 608 and 557, right? Very specific. So when you hear that Abraham is from Ur of Chaldea, that dates things. The Bible writers unknowingly implied that Abraham was from Ur during the 600s, during the Persian period, right? So that's a smoking gun right there where the Bible authors, the Bible is dating itself, right? Someone here is centered or focused on the Persian period just by calling it Ur of Chaldea. Next slide. So the Shabaka stone, right? The Shabaka stone, which is associated with that same time period, originally erected as a lasting monument at the great Temple of Ptah in Memphis, Temple of Ptah in Memphis, in the late 8th century BCE. So this is getting into the Persian period, right? We're leading into the early years of the Persian period. The stone was at some point removed for an unknown reason to Alexandria. Homer W. Smith dates the original text to the first dynasty, calling it the oldest written record of human thought. Breasted, Adolf Ehrman, Kurt Seth, and Herman Junker all date the stone to the Old Kingdom as well, right? So this stone is from that early Persian period, but they date the theology back to the Old Kingdom, right? So this Memphite theology or Memphite drama that established Ptah as the creator of all things, including gods, right? The creation was first spiritual and intellectual activity facilitated by the divine heart and tongue, meaning speech, or this concept of the logos, speaking existence into being. Right? So putting together these elements, if the Bible is drawing the logos from Ptah and the word, and Ptah using the word for creation, it's very telling that it's borrowing from this Shabaka stone of the Persian period, where it also begins the father of the Hebrews from Ur of Kasdan in the Persian period. So vicariously and unknowingly, if Abraham is the first Hebrew, then the first Hebrew appeared during the Persian period, is what the Bible is implying. Next slide. But let's see if that holds up to scrutiny, right? Because there was a Jewish population or a Yahudim population at that time in Elephantine, and we know this in their culture through the Elephantine papyri, right? So we can use this Elephantine population to see if these people were practicing what Abraham brought forth, right? This Hebraism, because Elephantine is from around the time of the Chaldeans. It is around the time of the Persian period. Next slide, please. So in the Old Kingdom, Elephantine was known as the door to the south, since it was the most southerly city and the starting point of the Sudanese trade, right? So this is very close to Nubia, right? In the Middle Kingdom, it was an administrative center for Egyptian-controlled Nubia. During the New Kingdom, the region was part of the province of Nubia. So at one point, Elephantine was part of Nubia. Elephantine was part of Kush, right? So, but from the Sate period, it again became a frontier fortress. In modern times, the island is the site of two Nubian villages, right? So Elephantine was very south. It was very close to Nubia. It was very connected with Nubia. The population there, we know, was definitely melanated. And if you want to say that the Elephantine Yahudim population there was melanated, I wouldn't have a problem with that either. You know what I mean? We've already talked about the Afro-Asiatic and African origins of these Semitic peoples in the first part of this presentation anyway. So the blackness of these peoples, I wouldn't have a problem with if any of the Israelites want to go that route. But what were these people practicing on? Did they reflect the Bible? Next slide, please, Sa. The Elephantine Papyrus predates all extant manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible. But do you hear the Hebrew Israelites talking about, well, according to the Elephantine Papyrus and according to what they was practicing? No, very hush-hush about that, right? Let's see why. So, and thus scholars give a very important glimpse at how Judaism was practiced in Egypt during the 5th century BCE, as they seem to show evidence of the existence in 400 BCE of a polytheistic Jewish sect, right? So the Elephantine peoples, these were Yehudim, but they were polytheistic, right? That's why these Elephantine papyri that are even older than the Bible, they're hush-hush about that. No one's talking about reading from the Elephantine Papyrus and, well, according to such and such of the elephant, right? Because it's polytheistic. And it's polytheistic not because these people were just a sect of polytheistic Jews. That tradition, the Yahwist, the Yehudim of that time, were still polytheistic from their Canaanite origin. The monotheism had not formed yet at this time. So they are not some fringe side polytheistic sect. They represent the general polytheism that all of those Yehudim were practicing at that time. Next slide, please. So let's get to the Elephantine Passover Papyrus and a figure called Hananiah, right? And this Elephantine Papyrus that they call the Passover Papyrus, it's actually not a Passover Papyrus at all. And it does not substantiate the practice of the Passover and that tradition being held in Elephantine. The mention of leavened bread actually comes from the Persian practice of unleavened bread. And that is where this tradition comes from. That is also why it's mentioned in this so-called Passover Papyrus, right? And also, to go with this Persian influence, there was also a Persian fire holder, right, at Elephantine amongst this population. So what this clearly reflects is the Persian influence, right? The Persian cultural diffusion that this Elephantine population has. And this figure Hananiah that's mentioned in the Elephantine Papyrus, right? The work, there's a article published by Gad Barnea. It's called Canaan is Against Us, the Rise and Fall of Hananiah and the Persecution of the Elephantine Yahwist, right? Or the Yahwist in Egypt. And it writes about Hananiah, who is a Yahwist. Yahwism is going on, but it is still Canaanite polytheism. This is the monolatry that they're talking about. So Hananiah comes, he's a cultic figure. He's coming from Samaria, and the population in Elephantine is complaining about the persecution that they're facing from the Egyptians and their practices. And the quote from another letter mentioning Hananiah says that Canaan is against us ever since Hananiah has come to Egypt. Right? So this Elephantine population, they were Yahwist. They were the forebearers of what we would later see in the later stages of Judaism. But they are Yahwist still practicing the polytheistic tradition. And even this Hananiah figure, right, is coming from Samaria, but he is not establishing Hebraic observance. He is not establishing Torah law. So this is the significance here. But it is also put forth that the scholars think that this is actually the inspiration for the biblical Joshua, the story of a Yahwist becoming in control of Egypt, because Hananiah was sent to Egypt most likely as a Persian satrap, right? You had, under the Persians, you had the governor, and then above the governor of a region was the satrap. Hananiah was higher than the governor, and he was a satrap in training. So he was a Sumerian sent to Elephantine as a Persian satrap or administrator. Next slide. And here is the author Gad Barnea, right? The archaeologist Gad Barnea. we have thousands of documents from Yahwistic/Jewish sources. When I combine all of the documents from Egypt, mostly from Elephantine and Babylonia, the different settlements in Babylonia like El Yahudu and others, and in Judea and Samaria, these provinces. So when I look at all of this data, all of it together, there is literally zero evidence for any knowledge or any familiarity with the Bible throughout the entire period. He's talking about the Persian period now, right? The supposed Chaldean period. There was no evidence for the knowledge of the Bible, even in the 600s, 500s, and 400s BC of the Persian period. Zero evidence for any knowledge or familiarity with the Bible. Next slide. The Elephantine papyri, not just Elephantine, everywhere. I mean, as I said, we have thousands of documents. And if we combine everything from Egypt, and again, not just Elephantine and Babylonia and the provinces of Judea and Samaria, if we combine all of this together and look for the smallest hint of familiarity with the Bible, there is none. That's crazy. There's simply none. The Bible did not exist. This man said the Bible did not exist in Elephantine. It didn't exist in the Babylonian population, in Judea, in Samaria. He said the Bible did not exist. That's wild, family. In the 600s, 500, 400 BCE, the Bible still did not exist. Next slide, please. So let's examine this Canaanite Yahwist. We said there was a major cultic reform amongst the Yahwist in the end of the 7th century and the 6th century BCE. This is just a name reform, though. It's not like they had new observances or new laws that they had to follow. They don't see anything like that at that time. And it says, we found an example in the archaeological record of the same person switching their name from Yo to Yahoo. And this was the name change, right? The pronunciation went from Yo to Yahoo. Next slide, please. But it was only a name reform. And here's an example here, like in the north, where the Hyksos were from, in the north, where the Amorites were from, in the north, where Ugarit is, they were pronouncing it Yo. And in the south, they were pronouncing it Yao. But then after the name reform, everywhere uniformly was pronouncing it Yao, right? Which can be pronounced in a harsh way, as in Yao, if you want to pronounce it in a more Greek way and emphasize Yao, or you can pronounce it the soft way of Yahoo. But Yao and Yahoo represent the same name reform change. Next slide, please. So about Alexandria, historically, it is so clear and so conspicuous that up until the Library of Alexandria was established really at the late end of the 4th century, beginning of the 3rd century BCE in Alexandria, up until that moment, we see as I've said several times already today, zero evidence for any type of knowledge of the Bible anywhere in the Jewish diaspora. So before Alexandria came about, there was no evidence, nowhere in Babylon, nowhere in Samaria, nowhere in Judea, nowhere in Elephantine, or the Unayas temple in Egypt for that matter, right? Because they also had a Yehudi population at the Unayas temple in Egypt. He says there was no knowledge of the Jewish Bible. And only after Alexandria comes on the scene, then you get knowledge of the Bible. This change at the beginning of the 3rd century is so clear. Clearly we start seeing those names appearing in the list of names. We start seeing them in Hecataeus of Abdera and so on. And it's so clear that there was a shift around that time. Next slide, please. Who else said that if you want to understand what you're living in today, if you want to understand what's going on around you today, you got to study Alexandria, right? Someone else said that as well. So the earliest mentions of Moses in the Torah, Hecataeus of Abdera or of Teos, right? 360 BCE to 290 BCE was a Greek historian who flourished in the 4th century BC. Though none of his works survive, his writings are attested by later authors in various fragments, in particular his Egyptica, a work on the society and culture of Egypt and on his Hyperboreans. 6 fragments survive of his Egyptica and regarded Egyptian philosophy, priests, gods, sanctuaries, and Moses, wine, and which makes mention of clericus. and gymnosophists. Right? So the earliest mention of Moses is by Hecataeus of Abdera, a Greek, during the Hellenistic period. Moses was not mentioned at all during the Persian period. Moses was not mentioned at all in Elephantine, Samaria, Judea, or in Babylon during the Persian period. No mention of Moses or the Bible or Torah observance. And it is only during the Hellenistic period by a Greek where Moses is first mentioned. The first person historically in the record to utter Moses was a Greek. That's damning. That's very telling, family. Next slide, Sa. Professor Jonathan Adler, another archaeologist, and his name Yonatan represents that name change, right? That was pronounced in the North before the reform to the Yao or Yahoo. Like Jonathan Adler was one of the pronunciations. The earliest evidence that we have of the Torah being observed is from the middle of the 2nd century BCE. So this is another archaeologist who's saying the earliest evidence that we have for the Torah being observed is during the Hellenistic period. Prior to this time, the trail of evidence ends. That's exactly what Gad Barnea said when he said during the Persian period in Babylon, in Elephantine, Judea, Sumeria, there is no evidence for Torah observance or Hebrew culture. That's exactly what Professor Jonathan Adler, the archaeologist, says. Prior to this time period, the trail of evidence ends. We no longer find archaeological evidence, nor textual evidence which points to widespread observance of the Torah, or in fact, any kind of observance of the Torah in actuality. So listen to the definitive language that they're using. They're using words like there is no evidence, right? None at all, none whatsoever, never. Like the Gad Barnea, the archaeologist, is saying this, and Jonathan Adler, the archaeologist, is saying this, using this strong negative language. Next slide. It's the home stretch, family. Thank you so much for tuning in. Jonathan Adler examines the material culture, right? Immersion pools, textual evidence, recognition of certain festivals, recognition of the Sabbath, abstinence of pork, and recognition of the Torah. So, and the recognition of certain festivals, that's why it's important to point out that the Elephantine papyrus is not a Passover papyrus. They are not recognizing the festival of Passover. That's what's so important about pointing that out, right? Because that would be evidence of Torah observance. But the Passover papyrus actually is not about the Passover. Next slide, please. So in the time period that Jonathan Adler starts to find this Hebrew culture, this Abrahamic tradition, Torah observance, is specifically during the Maccabee and Hasmonean period. It is this group that institutes the Hebraic and Torah observance that we know of, that we would have expected to see in Judea, in Elephantine, in Samaria, but we do not see that. So he says, I look backwards in time, starting with the 1st century of the Common Era, right? This is the time of Jesus. I start from the 1st century of the Common Era and go backwards to the 1st century before the Common Era, to the 2nd century before the Common Era, to the 3rd century before the Common Era. The fact that we don't have any reference to any of the biblical text, stories, and laws, the fact that we have practices which go against contravene the Torah law, all point to him that there was no existence. So not only were they not observing the Torah, they were doing things that went against the Torah. And just for a side note, the first inscription of a person identifying as an Israelite is in Delos, Greece. The first time someone proclaims to be an Israelite is in Delos, Greece, by Pavlos the Sumerian. Pavlos the Sumerian, who was a contributor to the building of the Serapeum in Delos, ironically. Next slide, please. So when you talk about the 2nd century and the Hellenistic period, where the Hebrew tradition, the Torah observance, mention of any of these biblical figures happens is also where you get the Dead Sea Scrolls and Greek Septuagint, right? That reinforce this narrative. So you can see the Dead Sea Scrolls are not based off of something more ancient, a text. They're not preserving text and a Torah that is more ancient than that period. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found from that time period because they had just been invented in that time period. The Septuagint dates to 225 BCE because that narrative of Hebrews and Moses was just being invented in that time period. So the Dead Sea Scrolls don't represent an iteration of that Qumran community that had been preserving the Torah for thousands of years. The Qumran community and the Dead Sea Scrolls represented a community that freshly got that stuff. And the narrative of the Old Testament was still being modified in the first century, where you find evidence where the sacred mountain goes from Gerizim and is changed to Elba. Right? In the first century in the Torah, there's a mountain that is centralized, and it goes from Gerizim, the Sumerian holy mountain, to Elba. So the Old Testament Torah was still even being modified in the first century. Next slide, please. So, since we're talking about the Bible being a Hellenistic construction, right? In the Hellenistic period, the term Canaanite would make you think of Carthage. So when you hear the Bible polemicizing against Baal, polemicizing against the Canaanites, talking bad about Asherah, talking bad about the Canaanites, talking bad about Baal, the reader of the Bible at that time when it was freshly minted, when they saw the Canaanites stink, they stupid, they're evil, when they closed it, they thought Carthaginians, the Carthaginians who were the competitor of the Greeks, who were the competitor of the Romans. So one would ask themselves, God energy, if you're saying that the people of Israel were Canaanites, why does their book speak against the Canaanites so much? And it's because the Greeks are producing this text for the Canaanite Yahwists to turn against the Canaanite Carthaginians. And that Carthage represented Canaanite practices in the old Canaanite way. So thank you, family. Thank you so much for that, for tuning in. Thank you, sa.neter, for providing the platform and space for me to talk. And the biggest takeaway from this, I want y'all to know the genetic evidence. I want y'all to know that Israel is a Canaanite culture. Everything about it is Canaanite. And when the Bible speaks against Canaanites, the Bible is polemicizing against Carthage specifically.
Brother, that was powerful, man. I don't know how they come back from that. And the reason you feel like this, Yoram Yahoo, the reason why you feel like this is only because you are a believer. You believe. You don't know no information. You just a believer. You don't know a goddamn thing. That's why you believe, because it stops you from knowing. See, this brother knows. We in the process of knowing. We don't want to believe a goddamn thing. Either you know it or you don't, or you do research to find out. We don't want no goddamn belief. And that's what religion do to you. And that's why most of you are dumb as hell, don't want to know nothing, don't want to learn nothing. And so you just become believers. Stupid as hell. Anybody that says something against your foundation of belief, you goes against it. Even when you are being shown in your own Bible, which I have done so many times. Even when I show it to you, you in disbelief. Because you think you are defending what you call is your God. All of a sudden, God needs you to defend it? No, he don't. But anyway, brother, hey, I bet you won't step up here, Yoram Yahoo, and show your face and ask the brother a question. You're not going to do it. You know why? Because you're scared. You ain't going to do that. You're not going to do it. Yoram Yahoo, prove me wrong, Yoram Yahoo. Hit the link. Hit the link, Yoram Yahoo. I challenge you to hit that link. You ain't gonna do it. You're a kitten.
So
what we call kittens.
Just for the people, right? These books here, the books that I showed all of those pictures of, I have. Those are the pictures that I took myself. Those highlights in the presentation are my highlights from my hand. I have the books that I referenced, sa.neter's Phoenician history right here. Egypt, Canaan, and Israel by Donald Redford right here. Carthage Must Be Destroyed by Richard Miles right here. Right? Stories from Ancient Canaan right here. So I know you read, brother. I know you're informed. I just wanted to show that this is information that's very personal to me, and I'm doing the firsthand research because I actually have those books right here as well. That's the only reason why I showed it.
Yeah. Hey, Apostle, this is not the time for the questions. That's going to be on part 2, brother.
I got one. You told Jeremiah to come up and ask one question.
You're not Jeremiah, brother.
That's okay. I still got one.
That's no such thing as you have one question.
I just got one.
There's no such thing.
One question, and I'll wait till tomorrow. Because mostly when he started, I was like, man, okay. I was like 99% with it.
Yeah, you can't refute this.
No. I can refute a lot.
That's what you could do.
I can refute a lot.
No, man, it's new
bomb squad. They call it for the bomb squad.
That's
bomb them bad.
Light work. Light work.
Super light.
Listen, brother.
Hey, Apostle, you know you too old, man. You too old to mess with these young G's, brother.
Brother, please.
You gotta know
That's my elder.
Please, them two young guys don't
That's
even
still
agree.
my elder. That's still my elder.
Don't even agree.
You gotta know when to pass on
The elders got to know when to fall back.
Right, exactly, man.
So hear me out. Now, this is the toughest environment. He should not mind scrutiny of what he presented. He shouldn't. Anybody can go to an atheist that wrote a book and has a strong opinion about things. But when you misrepresent scripture and give an opinion that's outside of scripture, and scripture, for the comment about Jerusalem, your daddy is this and your mom is that, that's a land. There's no people called Jerusalem. There's no people called Jerusalem. That had nothing to do. We know where Jacob's mama came from. Jacob is Israel. We know where his father came from. His mama not a Hittite.
Oh my God.
A Hittite is born of Ham, Cush, Canaan, Jerusalem. That is one of Canaan.
Are you going to ask the question or what?
Yeah. Where in scripture does Abraham kills his son? Like you alluded.
No, he doesn't. I wasn't saying that to say that Abraham followed through with it. But hold on real quick. There are Jewish sources in the Talmud where Abraham comes down from the mountain by himself, implying that he did go through with it. It's not in your Bible, but there are Jewish sources that imply Abraham did go through with the sacrifice. But you're right. It's not in the Bible that happened. I was never making that claim.
Right. That's a fact.
He's done talking. Why you move my mic? Jewish sources. That's why we don't read the Talmud or the Mishnah. You see, because of Jewish sources. Okay, Jewish sources don't teach about Christ. You mentioned Krios. That's Christ. That's not Lord. Krios don't mean Lord. Krios means Christ. It means to be anointed. There's several things you mentioned that are just blatantly not true.
Pardon me, Elder. You actually misheard and misrepresented my statement. I never said Creo meant Lord.
I said Krios. I said Krios.
Right. Whatever you said that means anointed, I related that with Eshmun, the oiled one, meaning anointed one, because you would use that term with Eshmun being the oiled one, because krios means to smear with scented oils and unguents. So me and you are in agreement. Yes, sir. That's why this is fine, because I gave a lot of information. So in that process, there could be room for a little bit of misinterpretation or just forgetting what I actually said.
The Morate is here. Yirmiyahu is here. Sayu Actual, he's here. My young brother is here. And he's a young brother, much like Kasai. He's a little probably older than Kasai, but he's a young brother. But I'm gonna go ahead and wait till tomorrow. Just let it known that if Christ was a Phoenician Canaanite, he wouldn't have told the woman of Syria, he wouldn't have called her a dog if she was the same as him, because she was a Phoenician Canaanite, a Syrian that he referred to as a dog.
Brother Apostle?
If he himself was that, because he's not, he wouldn't have told her
Permission to speak
to her. He would have just go ahead and healed her.
All right, Apostle. All right. Thank you. All right.
Apostle?
I say, what you got, man? What you got to say about our brother, man?
Man, awesome job, man. Great presentation, man. Hebrew Shema in the building, Bomb Squad in the building. I really admired the fact how you went in on the Zedek as well, because you know I had that debate with the brother General Yashar, as far as the Zedek in its relation to Melchizedek as well. Yes, and I like how you brought that out, and the fact that Abraham was so susceptible, how he just accepted this priest of El, you know, over there, this priest of Zedek, I mean, once he gets over to the land of Canaan. The way that he accepted it, you can tell that this is a Canaanite rhythm, that this is a Canaanite theme. You know, it was he didn't buck back. It was complete acceptance into Melchizedek's way. He gets the basically working for Melchizedek. Melchizedek is giving him orders. Like, yeah, I really like how you brought that out, brother, and drew those parallels, showing that, and I love how you even showed the actual plagiarization when you went into the BR versus what was going on in Psalms. Beautiful work, bruh. Like the Hebrews, they can't, like, you untouchable, God energy. That was untouchable, brother Ashe.
I appreciate it, brother Ashe. Hotep.
Humble. What's up, brother? What you got, brother?
Blessings. I just want to say to my brother God Energy, Brody, I knew you was going to bring the fire, bro. That was an amazing presentation.
Appreciate it.
Again, bro, I think you laid waste. Listen, you dropped the first bomb, bro, in Hebrew Shema. You hear me? You did a lot of land or waste to, you know, you did a lot of damage to that belief system. I appreciate it. I appreciate you talking about the Amorites. I appreciate you talking about the language, which I do want to classify that, because you know we had people saying that, you know, Jesus wasn't a Phoenician Canaanite, and I was watching your presentation. I never heard you say that. I did hear you mention about the language that they were using was that. And so, brother, you just did an amazing job. Keep it up, brother. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you, Humble. You already know, bro. You already know. Bomb Squad all day. They calling for the Bomb Squad.
You know it.
Light work.
What's going on, man? Is this Yirmiyahu? You call yourself Yirmiyahu, brother?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Peace and blessings.
Peace.
You call me Starfire.
Yeah, what you got, man?
Yeah. So first and foremost, all praise to the Most High Yah, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, who is Israel. Yeah, so I didn't see the whole presentation. So the only part that what I came in on is when the brother is talking about that Judaism was created by the Greeks. False. If that's the case, why did they have to have 70 elders or 70 scholars to come from Judea to go down to Alexandria? That's my first question to the brother. And by the way, I did like how the brother laid out his presentation, but like I said, it was trash. You know what I'm saying? Good orating skills.
Thank you.
And presenting the information. I definitely give you that.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. As you may know, it's probably nerve-wracking coming up here doing a presentation and stuff like that. So I had to get over my nerves. So thank you so much for the compliment, my brother. Thank you. So I did not say that the Greeks invented Judaism, but I did say that the Greeks are the ones that published this Torah. They came up with the Hebraism. To be Hebrew is to accept an identity that was published by the Greeks for the means politically of pacifying the Yahwistic community that they were ruling. Because as you know, the Ptolemies took over Alexandria, the Seleucids took over the Levant. So the Greeks were in control of these Levantine peoples. In order to control them better, they came up with a text that played to their Semitic origins, but still served the Greek Hellenistic purpose. So the term Yahudi was around before the Hellenistic period, but all of those Yahudi that were practicing before the Hellenistic period were polytheists. They were polytheistic peoples. That's what the work of Gad Barnea points out, that his excavations at Elephantine, Babylon, Samaria, and Judea point out that it was all polytheistic before the Hellenistic period. So I'm glad you brought this up. Also, we get to talk about the letter of Aristeas, which is a pseudepigrapha, meaning a false inscription. Pseudo meaning false, epigraph or epigraphy meaning inscription. So the letter of Aristeas that talks about 72 scholars being summoned from Jerusalem to come translate the Bible in Alexandria is false. That did not happen. So that's the significance of the letter of Aristeas being a pseudepigrapha. It is a false document meant to create a myth about how the Bible came into existence, because in reality, the Bible came into existence as a Greek production.
Okay, good. So first things first, a pseudepigrapha does not necessarily mean that the information is false. It only recognizes that it doesn't know the writer. It doesn't know the writer. Nonetheless, this letter does exist. Okay, some say, because of the work that was put forth, they kind of put that down.
You got the letter, brother? You got it?
Say it again.
You got the letter?
Well, the letter is in the Septuagint. I don't have my Septuagint with me, but the letter is in the Septuagint. That's presented with the information about the Septuagint. So that's one. Okay. A pseudepigrapha does not mean that it's false information or to gather up and make some kind of myth out of thin air. It just only means that it does not know the writer.
So okay. I would just add a caveat to that, in that me and you are both correct about the meaning of pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha can mean that the entire thing is a fabrication, or pseudepigrapha can mean that someone slapped a different name on something. In the case of the letter of Aristeas and analyzing its elements, namely one of the individuals that was named to be a collaborator in the letter of Aristeas, he did not live during that time period and was imprisoned. So there's those types of details that show this letter in its narrative is a fabrication, and it's not just a pseudepigrapha dealing with name. Thank you for bringing that up.
But hold on. You are right, brother. Hold up. You are right. He's not right. Because just like the brother saying right here, Septuagint is a Greek production. So when he said is in the Septuagint, that's letting you know right there.
Greek is
Greek. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
He's wrong on that.
Okay, so watch this.
Yo, go ahead.
So watch this, right? Yes, Septuagint is Greek. It's Koine Greek. But guess what? Koine Greek is actually Hebraic. Okay, we don't come across any Greek inscriptions until we get to the Koine Greek that was spoken in the Levant in North Africa, which is in Egypt. The Jews in Egypt preferred Koine Greek over their own mother tongue. So that's one. So the main reason why we have some of these sources in the Greek is the fact that the scholars were more scholarly in Koine Greek than the actual Judean language. Okay, they preferred the Koine Greek over the Judean language. Okay, because of the fact that they were born in Egypt. So the lingua franca of that time would have been Koine Greek, which is Hebraic in nature. Okay, don't let the Greek part fool you. The only reason why it's Greek is because it's a foreign tongue that became the lingua franca of those regions. Okay, from Egypt all the way to Southwest Asia, which is Babylon and Persia and all those areas. Okay, Koine Greek, or well, mainly in the Levant and in Egypt. Okay, so Septuagint means 70, recognizing the 70 sages, or actually the 72 sages that went down into Alexandria Kemet. Okay, so let's not skip over the fact that these were actual Jews. When we go into the Apocrypha in the book of Maccabees, they send a letter down to the down into Kemet.
Maccabees.
Say it again.
All right. Yirmiyahu, you're not.
Can I respond to a little bit of that?
He's wrong again, Si. Even when he's talking about the Koine Greek language. About Koine Greek, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It has nothing to do with Hebrew.
No,
Hebrew.
don't know what you're talking about.
Hold on, can I?
Everybody, hold on. Would you like to get in the ring, brother, with one of these brothers? Anyone that you choose?
Oh yeah, it don't matter. Whoever wanted to jump out there.
Who you want? Point them out. Call them out.
Say got a big mouth, but it don't matter though. You know what I'm saying? I say got a big mouth. He always talk about the language. You don't know nothing about the language.
And what you want to do? And what's your topic? Present your topic. Say it one more time. You got slow.
Present yours.
Present my topic.
Yeah, present your topic. He said.
Oh, he's scared. He's
very scared. But I'll say this. Okay, I'll make this statement. That when it comes to the Semitic language itself, that it does not have its origins in Africa. Like how you kind of say North Africa. I keep throw that around. How about I make the statement that your Semitic language, especially the one that your boy Abraham would have originated near the Anatolian Caucasus region. And if we track in language by DNA, that's where your boy probably his DNA would have tracked from as well. Not nowhere in Africa like y'all be trying to place it and put it. How about that?
Okay, oh yeah, that's a good topic. Because first and foremost, when we talk about Africans, right, we're talking about Kemites. Now, according to the biblical records, the Hittites, who are the sons of
matter of fact, I'm sorry, but I don't mean to cut you off. Can I just? I want to propose a more simplistic.
Hold on. Wait a minute. Before you go there,
I want to speak next.
The Hittites would have spoken. We could say a Khmu Syriac language, meaning that it was more of a. It's still Afro-Asiatic, but they're more so on the Canaanite, because now when y'all say Canaanite or y'all talk about the Hebrews, the particular kind of Canaanites that we're actually referring to is from Pan Aram to the Transjordan, okay, all the way into ancient Israel areas, which is of course is Judea, all the way into Samaria. Okay, so the Hittites spoke a Afro-Asiatic language that Abraham was able to communicate. Therefore, they share the language. Therefore, if they share the language, they share the language. Yes, yes. They share the language that would have stemmed from, you could say, Anatolia, because me personally, I don't believe in no out of Africa theory. I'm gonna say out
So
of
why'd you say
Syria,
Hold on.
Turkey.
Hold on. Can I?
Yeah,
All
out
right.
of Turkey.
Let me chime in now, please.
All the ancient black nations flourished from that area. We see
All right.
Kemet, and Babylon
Kemet
merged
is
at the
not by
same time.
Anatolia.
This brother
Kemet
just
is
said
nowhere
he the
close to
author out
Anatolia.
of Turkey theory.
Kemet is
Hold on,
nowhere
brother.
Anatolia
close
is
to
right there,
Anatolia.
brother.
Can I
Anatolia is right
respond?
Just said
Can I
the
respond
Anatolia.
to what the brother
Syria is
saying?
right there.
All right, hold
Bro,
on.
okay.
Hold on, y'all.
Okay, let me just propose a topic if you don't mind,
Hold
GE. I just
up,
want to propose a topic.
Ashay, hold on real quick, bro. I gotta respond to a bunch of fallacies that he put up there. So first of all, you definitely missed the beginning part of my presentation, right? Because I clearly demonstrated how the Greek script, the writing system, came by way of the Canaanite Phoenicians, right? I showed the pottery. I cited the Cypro-Minoan script, which was intermediary between Canaanite and the Greek script. So I already showed the transmission that the Greek script did come from the East, but it was before the time of the Hebrews. The Greek script is based off of the Phoenician Canaanite script. So me and you could agree that the Greeks and their script was inspired by the Semitic peoples. It's called the 72, right? It's called the 70 because that was its almost ISBN number in the Library of Alexandria. That's why it gets the designation of the 70, right? Because that was its log number in the Library of Alexandria. And again, before the time of Alexandria and before the Hellenistic period, per Gad Barnea, per Jonathan Adler, whom are both archaeologists. Jonathan Adler looks from the 1st century going backwards, and Gad Barnea starts from the Persian period going forwards. Both of these separate archaeologists say that when you get to the Hellenistic period, that's when you find Hebraism. That's when you find acknowledgement of the Torah. That's when you find acknowledgement of Moses. But after the Hellenistic or before the Hellenistic period, meaning the Persian period, the Babylonian period, the Assyrian period, all of those periods, there is no acknowledgement or evidence of the Torah in existence, Moses in existence, Abraham in existence, or any knowledge of that Hebrew story at all. So,
Damn.
and I'm
Yo,
gonna land my plane with this. The Hittite spoke an Indo-European language. Please don't ever say that the Hittites spoke Afro-Asiatic language. The Hittites spoke an Indo-European language, so much so that the Hittites, and when you see them, the depiction of the Hittites and the sharpness of their beak nose, it's called the Hittite nose in art history and in archaeology. The Hittite nose is known as an ethnic marker, meaning when you see the etching of the Hittites and they have that beak nose, that big Gandalf the wizard nose, you know that that is depicting an Indo-European person and an Indo-European speaking person. So this is what the Hittites were dealing with up in Anatolia, Indo-European, not Afro-Asiatic.
All right, come on. No, I say, let's go.
Yeah, exactly, God Energy. Thank you. And what I was going to present to the brother, I got 2 topics for you. You can take either one. A, it could be that your Bible in its original setting was polytheistic, along with the followers. Or we can do B, Ham is not the African. What would you like to do, Yirmiyahu? What you want to do? Since I got a big mouth, let's see if you can shut it.
We could do actually both, but I'll go with the first one where we talk about the children of Israel being first and foremost polytheistic.
All right.
I said the Bible. We gonna work it out.
Listen, y'all, I got to get out of here. I got to go across the street to the Coliseum. They got something going on over there. Tell us who the real Hyksos were, and yeah, they going in over there. So I'm going over there. I'm dropping the link inside of the chat so we can all head over there. I'll be over there, and I'm gonna see what this brother got. I think He going in right now. I'm watching it. I'm watching both channels as we doing this. The link is in the chat, family. I'm headed over there right now. Peace and black power to y'all. Hey, Yahoo. Can you put the number in the back so I can contact you to set up this debate?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm gonna do that right now.
Okay, go ahead, brother. And peace to you, my brother. God energy. Peace and black power.
Peace, brother.
Peace. Good show, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
When you gonna come back for part 2 for the questions?
Oh, whenever. When people start hitting you up, complaining and stuff, we could set up whenever they're gonna be around.
All right, that's what's up, man. That's what's
No
up.
problem.
Peace and blessings to you, brother. Peace. We out.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Ass back there, Si.
Okay, good looking, man. I'm gonna definitely give you a shout out, call, and let you know what's going on. Set this thing up with you and the brother. I don't think you want this brother God energy. I don't think you want energy. You want Ashe, but Ashe is just as raw as well. You know. So it is what it is.
All right, peace and blessings to you, Elder.
Peace and blessings, brother. I'm out. We out. Man, I hope y'all enjoyed this joint. I really did. I did. This brother God energy is fire, man. Smoke.
That is for my sisters trapped in religion. Wake up and free the babies. sa.neter speak the truth, he's on a mission. Yeah. The house of consciousness, the final call. Will you Bible thumpers wake up, all just fall? The house of consciousness, the final call. Stop believing in fairy tales, especially Paul. I use the Bible like a lantern in the night, trying to wake up my sister. True light, the house is closing in, it's a total mess. You ignore my wisdom, the ultimate test. Step inside the HOK, it's the toughest terrain, where the truth hits hard, the cuts bring pain. I try to wake you with the word in my hand, to get you to the truth, to help you understand. I gave you the scriptures, chapters and verse. I gave you the keys to break the curse. I gave you Torah to unlock with keys. Break the mental chains and be free. The final call. Yeah, will your Bible thumpers wake up, all just fall? The house of consciousness, the final call. Stop believing in fairy tales, especially Paul. They call you apostle like you a prophet of God, telling lies and fooling people can't be that hard. You're preaching from YouTube, looking for a handout. I'm standing on family, trying to bring the truth out. Welcome to the HOK, where the truth resides. No more hiding in the pews where the dies. We speak against the Bible just to wake the inner sight. Come inside the HOK doors, we bring the light. The house of consciousness, the final call. Will your Bible thumpers wake up, all just fall? Stop believing in fairy tales, especially Paul. sa.neter, don't stop, wake the sisters up. Don't
Come on, y'all. Let's head on across the street. I dropped the link. Let's get on over there. It's getting ready to get lit right now. Them young brothers getting ready to go in. Let's go.